Hello, this is Dr. Paul Cottrell, and this is going to be episode 34 of Grave Wisdom. I'm recording this on April 25th, 2024. So what I'd like to do is I want to start with, there's a lot to cover. I did an episode with Miss Taiwan about the Columbia University protesting that was going on. So that's on the channel. So please watch that episode. It's an interesting perspective that she has. We have differing opinions about, what's going on, and that's okay. It's okay to have different opinions, all right? What I want to do is I want to start with this supposedly Hamas deal with the Israelis. This is coming from Live Now from Fox, and I'm also doing a simulcast with Spaces, so I'm going to be going back and forth here. But what is interesting about this is that they want to do a 5-year plus truce. All right, Hamas doesn't make deals unless they are right on the edge of failure. All right, this is why it's so important that the Israelis stick to the plan and root out Hamas, Hezbollah, and the military apparatus of Iran, or it's going to get worse. Because if they want to do a 5-year truce, don't you think that they'll reconstitute? Because they did something very similar in 2016. All right, they did something very similar in 2008 and 2009. All right, they reconstituted, and then what happened was there were more carnage and destruction. And it gives more time for unconventional warfare to be developed, procured in that region. So it's really important to actually stick to the plan and root out the terrorists. But let's listen to what Hamas's truce plan is.
Again, following breaking news, a top Hamas political official telling the Associated Press the Islamic militant group of Hamas willing to agree to a truce of 5 years or more with Israel, and that it will lay down its weapons and convert into a political party if an independent Palestinian state is established along pre-1967 borders. Joining us live this morning to explain the latest on this breaking news is Homeland Security expert and criminal justice as well from the University of New Haven, Mr. Ken Gray. Good morning to you. Thank you so much for being here as always.
Good morning, Janae. Glad to be with you again.
So
now, just I'll let him speak, but let me just, put my 2 cents in here. To pre-existing borders going all the way back to the 1960s. The red heifer is getting close to being sacrificed, all right? And I've been saying that that's the countdown for actually the preparation to start building the Temple Mount, right? But that could take, it may take years or decades to do. But it starts the countdown because you need the red heifer ashes to purify the vessels and the individuals to actually build the temple, because people have been exposed to human corpse, and that causes a certain ritual impurity, all right, preventing for the temple to be rebuilt. The Muslims know this, so the countdown's getting close, all right, and they're trying to get some sort of international affairs agreement for a truce to try to, go back to some old borders that were established in the 60s. But the thing is that the countdown with this red heifer ash is not the borders from the 1960s. It's the borders that was written in the Torah, all right, in the Old Testament. And those borders are a lot bigger than what Israel is right now. That means all of the West Bank, all of Jerusalem, parts of the Jordan, parts of Syria, and parts of Lebanon. Gaza Strip stays with the Palestinians. And this is the big elephant in the room that no one wants to talk about. It's easy to demonize Jews. It's easy to demonize the Palestinians in the modern context. But the big elephant in the room is a larger Israel border going all the way back to the Old Testament and the countdown that starts with the red heifer ash when they burn the red heifers. That's the big elephant in the room that no one's talking about.
Ken, I saw this breaking news come in this morning, and as we've seen Hamas say several things before, not always follow through, how reliable is this statement from them? And I guess one thing that stood out to me, them saying that they will convert into a political party, which some of them are already saying they're a political party there in the Middle East.
So prior to October 7th, Israel had been treating them as if they had given up terrorism and had been converting over to a political party. They had been elected. They were running unopposed, and they were elected. And since then, there has been no further elections over in the Gaza Strip. But that being said, they've offered to convert over to a political party, and have stated that they're willing to take a 5-year truce or longer. That would be sufficient time for them to rebuild, to regroup, to prepare again, to strike against Israel once again, because you notice that in their statement they did not recognize Israel as a state, and that their long-term intention is to get rid of Israel and to make all of Israel into a Palestinian state. The return back to 1967, pre-1967 borders, that would mean that Israel would have to give up a lot of territory to Hamas, and that these are all non-starters, I believe. And so while this call for a two-state solution may be the right track, this particular offer is just unacceptable to Israel, I'm sure.
And if we pay close attention to the wording, they said they will lay down their weapons. They don't say anything about releasing the rest of the hostages. They don't say anything about respecting southern Israel that borders Gaza, not invading that area. They don't say anything even about the humanitarian crisis impacting Palestinians, since they did say they want to create an independent Palestinian state.
Yeah. Again, this is an offer that is not really a legitimate offer. It's not really one that Israel would consider at this point. And so I think Israel is mounting up their forces. They are making preparations for the entrance into Rafah, and that with the entrance into Rafah, they plan to wipe Hamas out. And so Israel has no reason why to accept this as a legitimate offer. Instead, they are focused on getting rid of Hamas altogether.
Another aspect, Mr. Ken, that's important to note is that they are saying this amid the Senate passing that billion-dollar aid package, obviously with aid going to Israel as well as Ukraine and Taiwan. That helps with their defense. So yes, also absolutely. The timing of all of this, it would make you think if they're a little scared because of the ammunition and artillery that Israel might now be able to have more of.
I think that is part of it, but I think even a greater part is that they are aware that Israel is making plans in Rafah, and with the entrance into Rafah, the majority of Hamas members are down in the southern part of the Gaza Strip in Rafah, and should the Israelis, the IDF actually carry out their plans of separating the Palestinians from the Hamas members and engaging Hamas there in Rafah, this could all be over, within a month or so, if their plan actually works. Now, I'm not sure that this plan really is one that is going to work, but nonetheless, Israel is planning to get rid of Hamas. They will not need to negotiate with Hamas. They plan there to be no more Hamas.
Mr. Ken, I want to ask you with your historical expertise. On the Israel side, we've heard the Israeli government and Israeli Defense Forces from the very beginning say this war is not against the Palestinian people, it's against Hamas. And then on the other side, we've seen innocent Palestinian people say, we want nothing to do with Hamas. They basically taken over in this area, forcing us to do things, forcing their way here, taking food, taking land. So if this was to happen, what would it mean for the Palestinian people? Because wouldn't it give them more power in a region that they've already tried to take control of?
Hamas, as I said, was elected, but they were elected because they were the only party running at the time. And they have yet to give up control of that. They have not called for any additional elections. So Hamas is the only power in the Gaza Strip there right now. And they would be reluctant to allow for any other party to pop up and challenge them. No, I think Hamas intends to hold on to power there in the Gaza Strip. This just really is not a legitimate offer, in my opinion.
So from here, what's next? Because this is the first update I've seen from those still talks out in Egypt. And of course, there will be negotiations going back and forth on both sides. But some would say the issue is that control, from what you've been saying from the very beginning on October 7th, control of this area. And knowing that Hamas is a terroristic organization, any amount of control they may have could potentially lead to more conflict. Let's say this truce happens, Mr. Ken. Okay, they're saying 5 years or more. Okay, let's say they agree to 6 years. Okay, what happens on year 7? Does the fighting continue again?
Yeah, as I say, this call for a truce may be just Hamas trying to buy some time to regroup and rearm and prepare for round 2 with Israel. So this is an attempt to stop the plans for the IDF entering into Rafah and terminating, neutralizing Hamas.
Mr. Ken, I thoroughly enjoy our conversations.
I basically agree with him. So please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com. We'll continue with this coverage here. But at my store, you can get the structural nano silver. I have 3 different liquids. I have the Max 35, which is 35 ppms. I have the Max 14, which is 14 ppms, parts per million. And then I also have the structural silver solution that's at 30 ppms. Pretty sure it's 30 ppms. So with the structural nano silver, you take a teaspoon of it a day. If you're not feeling well, take a tablespoon or 2 a day. You swish it in your mouth, you gargle, and you swallow. What that does is it neutralizes pathogens. It's also helping with that mucosal barrier in your upper respiratory tract, where in your oral cavity and in your throat area, where it will maintain that mucosal barrier. When that barrier is diminished or it is inflamed, it's easier to get sick. So this will reduce that. In addition, by swallowing this, it's also going to help with the GI tract and help to cleanse your GI tract. So take this every day. If you're not feeling well, take a tablespoon or 2 a day. And I have them at different price points. You can get it at 35 parts per million, 14 parts per million, 30 parts per million. In addition, I have these applicators that you can buy. So instead of carrying a big bottle in your bag to work or whatever, what you can do is just put the liquid in these applicators for a nasal spray. You can also use this liquid and spray your nose. The dropper, you can have it in a dropper form where you just put it in your mouth, or the spray, you can spray surfaces and help to disinfect those surfaces. the spray, this little spray, the spritzer, you can also put it in the back of your mouth and spray it to the back of your mouth. So this is a really important feature to get. So you don't have to carry a bottle and do it every day. So what I do, how I do it. So I have this in the cabinet in the kitchen, and I just take a teaspoon of it a day. If I'm not feeling well, I take a tablespoon or two. And if I'm going out and I put it in my bag, I'll put the liquid in the applicator and carry it around and use it when I need. So you have it around, you have it with you all the time. All right. And it doesn't cost that much. So go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and also get the applicators.
We work to keep the viewers informed. And then we're also following Germany as it relates to UNRWA, wanting to help the Palestinian people in Gaza with that humanitarian aid. And then, as you mentioned, IDF saying they will go into Gaza area with more raids, even though they did some weeks ago. Any more updates you can share with us as it relates to Middle East conflicts?
Two things. One is the West Bank. Is that the West Bank has been something that has continually had small outbursts there throughout this period since October 7th. It seems to be heating up even more. Settlers attacking Palestinians there in the West Bank, and vice versa. Palestinians attacking settlers there in the West Bank. And so you continue to see small outbursts of violence there in the West Bank that may become much bigger an issue. And the second part is that the conflict with Hezbollah continues to erupt along the northern border of Israel. In many ways, you might say that Israel is fighting a two-front war. One in the Gaza Strip there against Hamas, and the other one a much lower intensity front, but still a front against Hezbollah and other proxies across the northern border. So Israel has a lot of different things going on. They're dealing with Hamas, they're dealing with Hezbollah, they are dealing with the unrest in the West Bank, and then they just got through dealing with this missile exchange with Iran. So Israel has a lot of different problems going on at the same time.
So glad you brought that up really quickly. I thought we were about to wrap, but another great point you made. I want to ask you. So, with Hezbollah being a different terroristic organization than Hamas, like let's say this truce goes through, Mr. Ken, would Hezbollah then be trying to fight Hamas and they be trying to fight one another? Because at the end of the day, this is over control. And even though both of these terroristic organizations are against Israel, neither one wants the other to be in control of this region.
So the Hezbollah is Shia, Hamas is Sunni Islam, and the Sunni and Shia do not get along together. But the enemy of my enemy is my friend is the acting principle that's going on right now. Hezbollah is supporting Hamas to an extent because they're being directed by Iran to do so. But it's primarily because they are the enemy of Israel that Hezbollah is supporting Hamas. Otherwise, they would be fighting one another.
Always great perspective and expertise. Mr. Ken Gray, it's always a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you so much for joining us this morning on this breaking news. You enjoy the rest of it.
What we're going to do is we're going to go to Al Jazeera. But before I do that, please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get the D3 vitamin that I have. This is a gene expression cofactor, and it also helps to absorb calcium. If a cell is infected, it needs to go through apoptosis to get rid of it. D3 helps to do that. In addition, by following a certain type of protocol, you can actually reduce osteoarthritis with taking D3 and reduce cardiovascular disease. If you've been paying attention to me about how to use D3, you're going to benefit greatly. So please go to the store and get the D3.
Capacity has been committed by Israeli troops. There must be questions mounting about what it takes to change the minds of foreign governments who are still determined to support the Netanyahu coalition.
Well, look, they thought after 6 months, 7 months of unfolding genocide on our TV screens that they could avoid this. And to some extent, they have. They tried to weather the storm of public opinion, of the horrific scenes from Palestine. They tried to cover up the crime like bulldozers. They tried to deflect attention. They tried to provide more military assistance to the Israeli government so it could finish the job faster, but none of that has helped. If anything, worldwide support for Palestine, for its struggle for freedom and justice is increasing exponentially. And I think sooner or later, the Biden administration, the Sunak government, and others are going to have to confront the reality that they can no longer fend off for Netanyahu and his coalition of fanatics and fascists. That what is going on in Gaza must stop today, and certainly could not continue into more genocidal wars like in the likes of Rafah.
I want to ask you a little bit more about the protests that we're seeing in the US, because Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's weighed into this. He's been branding the protests as anti-Semitic. How do you think that is affecting US domestic politics, the division, if you like, between the sides in US politics?
Well, it's certainly fueling the tensions and the conflict within the United States with such lies and deception. I mean, the hyperbole on the part of the Netanyahu government to deflect from Israel's crimes in Gaza are just so outrageous. I'm not sure they even deserve commentary. But be that as it may, listening to the Prime Minister talking about mobs, anti-Semitic mobs that are reminiscent of German universities prior to Second World War, I mean, it is so outrageous, as I said. I'm not sure it deserves any commentary because it's such a desperate attempt on the part of the Netanyahu government to influence decision-making in the United States, portraying it as if those young students who are struggling to...
I said in October of last year, when this crisis started, that the tail will be eaten by the head of the snake, that the ultra-liberal logic will eat itself, and that we're going to see strife in the United States. And the ones that pick the side of Esau are going to be cursed. The ones that stick to the difficult path of staying with the soul of Jacob will be blessed. It's very simple, all right? And not to give in. Now, some people that listen, listening to this channel are going to be gravitated to the soul of Esau. Some of them are going to be gravitating to the soul of Jacob. It is not easy to, go through this turmoil, this tumult for either side. There are innocent people on both sides that are suffering. But the thing is that there is a cancer in the world. We use terms like terrorists or Islamic jihadists and all this stuff, but there's a cancer that's in this world that if it's not rooted out, we're going to see things that my generation and previous generations have seen with these terrorists. That is, cafes going to be blown up, buses will be blown up, not necessarily in Israel, but in Europe. The Muslim population is growing in England, growing in France, growing in Germany. it wouldn't be surprising that some sort of terrorist thing happens. People need to wake up. And so it's a battle of it's the battle of the twins. And they need to duke it out, and whoever wins, wins.
Opinion about important humanitarian causes around the world. And just for you to know and for our viewers to pay attention, those students at the likes of Columbia University, Harvard, NYU, and so forth are a coalition of tens of student groups that struggle each and every day for social justice, for racial equality, for better environment. These are the groups that are coming together to struggle to express themselves against war in Palestine. So to try and designate them as a mob of anti-Semites, it's just not going to go well amongst them and among the public opinion at large.
Marwan Bashar Azad is your senior political analyst. Marwan, as always, thank you very much indeed. Meanwhile, the airstrikes continue in Gaza. At least 8 Palestinians were killed in Rafah on Wednesday night. Israel launched a number of airstrikes in the southern city. 2 children were among those killed. One of the strikes hit a house, sheltering displaced people in the Yabna camp. It's time for the weather now. Here's Everton.
Hello, we're looking at more showers pushing across Iran, heading towards Afghanistan, northern parts of Pakistan. That could cause further flooding as we go through.
So
the
as
next
they're going
couple of
through
days. It's a good
the weather, I'm gonna transition to Fox News. Trump, before he was, I think, going into the courthouse, he decided to talk to some construction workers in New York, which was interesting.
They're great people, great contractors, and great people, and I have a lot of support. I hear the Teamsters. You know, I've done a lot of work with Teamsters. I've built a lot of buildings with the Teamsters, and they like me. A lot of Teamsters here, and it's an amazing show of affection. But we did a great job.
How important is the union vote? And you're here in New York City, you're talking with these members. Do you think you can maybe change some of their minds if they were lifelong Democrats to vote for you?
I think these maybe were Democrats, but for me, they're a Republican. There's not a Democrat in there. These are people. Look at that building. Look what we can do. We built a lot of great buildings in the city with these people, and they give me great support. They're really amazing. You know what? They're very talented people. They don't get the credit for it. They have very few people who can do what they do. We used to do 3 floors a week in concrete, and it was guys like this that did it. So it's very amazing.
Did you know about the
No, he's been very.
The best decision I've made this year, using Navan to manage our business travel and expenses. See, our company is growing, which means more trips, more.
No, he's been very nice. I mean, David's been very nice. Nice guy.
Did you know, Mr. President, did you know?
What's that? Well, we have a big case today. This judge isn't allowing me to go. We have a big case today in the Supreme Court on presidential immunity. A president has to have immunity. If you don't have immunity, you just have a ceremonial president. You won't have a president.
Did you know about the payments?
So we have a big, we have a very big case. Very big case going on.
Did you know about the payments?
And it's important to remember that there are people that are globalists that want to weaken the presidency. They want to weaken America. They want to weaken economically America. They want to weaken the border. They want to weaken the constitutional freedoms, and they want to weaken the executive branch so it can create enough argument within the legislative branch to allow for this controlled demolition to take place. If you get a pro-constitutional, pro-American kind of president in the office, that president can push back on globalism. But they don't want these globalists. They want to they want to weaken those branches of government that we have: the judicial, the legislative, and the executive. There's a reason for the executive branch. We're not just a parliament. There's a reason to have someone in charge of the military and someone as a leader. Now, if you don't have a system in place where the president can become the president can lead as president and not be superficial, right? If you don't have those provisions in place, then, like Trump said, it's going to be ceremonial and it's not going to mean anything. And that's exactly what the globalists want. So voting for strong executive branch, voting for a strong legislative branch, and voting for a strong judicial branch where there is equal power, the checks and the balances, then you have a strong constitutional republic. But if you listen to people like Chuck Schumer, who seems to be a globalist, he wants to weaken the executive branch, and he also wants to weaken the judicial branch. Well, that's not what our founding fathers wanted. And they go into detail that you can't have one pillar of the three of our government being more powerful than the other. But if Congress doesn't like something that the Supreme Court judges on, they try to ignore it. If Congress doesn't like what the executive branch wants, they try to demonize and try to create laws to prevent, that are unconstitutional, to prevent the executive branch from doing what it needs to do. But on top, also, we got to make sure that these other branches of government, like the executive branch and the judicial branch, doesn't overreach. The executive branch, at times, overreaches its power. I think that these executive orders are way out of control and they need to stop coming from the executive branch, right? But there's also this growing power of the legislative branch that has to be in check, and they need to follow the law instead of making up rules and demonizing people and using lawfare to get what they want. And the judicial branch needs to do their job, not be too passive on certain things, and not to be too aggressive on others. Too passive in the sense, I think they're way too passive when it comes to voter fraud, or I think that the executive branch is way too passive when it comes to this lawfare that's happening with Trump. I think Roberts, the Chief Justice, failed when it came to Obamacare legislation. And, at times it just seems as though these justices are captured and they're not really doing they're not really not following the Constitution. But at times they seem to be doing their job. All right. But there is this slippery slope of going towards socialism, okay, that I'm worried about. Now, recently, the Supreme Court has been pushing back. But if you look at a 30-year trend, I think that the Supreme Court has been failing America, not supporting the Constitution. So each of the branches are failing in different ways. They're either being too passive and not doing their job, or they're being too aggressive and overreaching the boundaries that were enshrined in the Constitution. Right? So what Trump is saying is really important, that you don't want a ceremonial president. You need to have provisions in place where a president can make decisions and not have to worry about the lawfare that takes place during the presidency or even after the presidency. Now, of course, it's within reason, but there is an orchestrated effort to weaken the executive branch. And that is coming from a globalist point of view, because they know that if you can weaken America, then globalism, the one world government, is that much closer. The last beacon of freedom for the world is right here in America, in the United States. If we lose, if we do not hold the line, then tyranny will ensue.
So you guys heard that right there. I mean, he's pretty confident here in what's going on in New York City in terms of turning people, what he says on his team here, who might have been lifelong Democrats. So that's kind of what we're hearing right now. And he's going to continue, right, to walk around and talk.
I think that he's dealing with the Republican Party chair. I think he's still doing it. That's Ed Cox. He is the son-in-law of Richard Nixon. The president has a history with the Nixon. Nixon identified him early as a presidential candidate in the future. Ed Cox is probably one of the most popular people in New York. And you wonder, guys, the president's within 10 points of Joe Biden in New York. Joe Biden's going to go up to Syracuse today for a cop's funeral, where they're having trouble getting state troopers to work in security because no cops want to be protecting the president that presumably is so weak on crime and punishment.
I like that he's doing this before court. It's like when he went up to Harlem and he went to the bodega and he had so much support from the crowd in Harlem. Now he's doing this. This is at Park Avenue and 48, somewhere in that area. There's a big building that's been under construction for a long time, close to Trump Tower. And hopefully he'll do things like this more often, take advantage of being able to campaign in New York and in this area.
The Democrats are going to wind up regretting that they've sequestered him in New York, because by the time this is all over, he's going to put New York in play.
Yeah, New York, they're already talking about an event in the Bronx and possibly at Madison Square Garden. If you're going to leave him here for 6 weeks, he showed up at the Bodegas Union on their invitation. This has been on the books, we understand, for a while. And this is something that is, it's unscripted, it is real, it's a slice of life. But in New York, we live in this unscripted slice of life.
And can you imagine Joe Biden stopping at an event like this and having this sort of organic enthusiasm? It doesn't exist.
He would actually say, read everything that he had to. He would pause when he had to, and would say it out loud.
And I think we're safe to say that this is the only president or candidate we've ever had who knows how many floors in a week you can build with concrete using steelworkers.
Because this thing was, I could pay for it, but they build it. And that's why he has so much respect.
Look at this. Look at in the background on the scaffolding. You have construction workers out there taking pictures. People, it looks like, over the cars.
And it might be in New York City, but whether he's going to bodega or doing this, he's talking about things that people across the country will relate to.
Yeah.
And whether it's safety.
Sending gift cards in bulk can be a nightmare. Tremendous, a platform that takes the stress out of sending payouts, like he said.
Yeah.
And whether it's safety and crime or the economy.
Yeah, they are yelling, oh, Trump, Trump, Trump. They're yelling 4 more years and USA, USA. Alexis, you're right there. Who else in the press corps besides you thought that this was newsworthy enough to show up?
You still want Alexis?
She probably doesn't do it.
You're talking to me. And there's a lot of people. No, I can hear you now. There's a lot of people here.
She
There's a
can't hear.
whole amount of press right in front of us. And then there's also so many people that are kind of coming now that this has been announced that we're nearby, that are trying to come and catch a glimpse, that are kind of being closed out by security. But the former president has spent pretty much, he's spending a lot of time here talking to these people. We know that he's in possible striking distance, right, in New York City. Who would have ever thought that? So he wants to spend time with these people while he's here to try and gain their support. So when he comes back over here, if we get another chance, I'm going to ask him, Brian, about that opportunity here in New York to try and beat Joe Biden, maybe flip some of these areas that are so dark blue, maybe a little bit red. And we saw a lot of people out there too in Harlem. The guy was at a bodega, former president of the United States. They had people out there wanting to talk to him there too, in that neighborhood.
We're showing you an aerial shot. Yeah. You can see how deep the crowd is. People reaching for him. I hope he signs my whatever it is that they're handing to him.
You know, it reminds you of something prior to the Oscars. People show up, they just want a glimpse, they want to see. And it must be maddening for people.
There are no ball gowns. These are the union workers.
I'm thinking about those panels of 10 legal experts who say every day how bad a person Donald Trump is. Your message is not resonating. You can indict him as much as you want. You can say whatever he wants. They are not listening. They're making their own decisions, and they believe that former president was fighting for them and will again, no matter what you say and how outraged you may be. From the Katie Courics in the world.
Well, we've seen all these unprecedented attacks on the president, former president, and the use of the courts to go after him. Well, this is what they're afraid of. This is why they despise him so much, and this is why even in the Republican Party, there are people that don't like him because they're terrified of him, because he can inspire this kind of enthusiasm from people by just showing up at a construction site.
A lot of people in that crowd, it's New Yorker Democrats, and many of them can relate to him and are saying that they're thinking about switching their vote, especially when it comes to either choosing between Biden or Trump. And in Pennsylvania, we did a Fox News survey, and among independents, he and Biden are neck and neck in the state of Pennsylvania. But it's interesting when you look at the independents in this survey. Trump had the advantage. He was ahead by 7 points among independents in March in that survey, and now he has an 8-point edge. So that could take him over the top.
Right. It's also noteworthy that this team runs like an efficient machine, and he knows exactly how long it's going to take to get downtown in order to get to court. And he's saying, why would I leave? Also, think about the president's mindset. It's pretty damaging to you emotionally. You got to sit there and hear these horrible things about you. You got to listen to a judge who tells you when to stand and when to sit and what to say. And this is an emotional lift for him. It's important for him to understand, no matter what's going on in that courtroom, there's something going on outside there that's a lot more positive.
Good point. Good point. This will carry him through.
And all along, I don't think that the court cases have anything to do, obviously, they have nothing to do with justice. It's all about what you're talking about. It's all about trying to humiliate him, take him off the campaign trail, do whatever they can to get off his game. And this is how he gets back on his game.
Why can't one of those people be in his jury pool?
Yeah, exactly.
Put your best off.
I have a job for you.
The prosecutors did everything in their power to make sure that didn't happen, I'm sure.
I'm Steve Ducey.
I'm Brighteon Channel.
All right, so I'm going to also play Al Jazeera on the U.S. campuses, their coverage.
Do you really want to make your holiday special? Tanzania has got so much to offer. From the famous Serengeti National Park, Ngorongoro.
A week after students at Columbia University.
Before we do that, because this is PNN, I have to go to commercial. Please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get the Clarity Factor. This will remove that brain fog. It'll help you concentrate at work and in school. And it'll also help to keep those dendrites, those dendritic connections, to be connected, and that improved conductivity between neurons. All right. When the dendritic connections start to recede, your brain starts to slow down in activity. All right. This is part of the aging process, but you can improve this because of neuroplasticity. All right. So if you read and talk to people and challenge your mind and take supplements such as the Clarity Factor, then what will happen is you're going to improve those dendritic connections. All right. And then by doing that, you're going to have better mental acuity. So go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get the Clarity Factor. In addition, there are a lot of people that don't get 3 cycles of REM sleep. So please go to my store and get the Good Night formula. You'll be able to get the 2 to 3 cycles of REM sleep a night. And when you do that, your body will be detoxifying because you need actually REM to help detoxify your body, especially the central nervous system. And you'll have more energy because you're well rested, and you'll be consolidating memory. Part of memory loss is not going into REM cycle sleep. So please go to the store and get the Good Night formula. It has tryptophan and melatonin in it.
In New York first began their camp in support of Palestine. The protests against Israel's war in Gaza have spread to college campuses across the United States. The White House says President Joe Biden supports free speech and non-discrimination at universities. There were scuffles at the University of Texas as police and state troopers tried to disperse the crowds. Hundreds of students have been arrested in the US since Friday. We have correspondents covering the protests from coast to coast. John Hendren is standing by for us at Columbia University in New York. But first, let's go to Rob Reynolds, who joins us from the University of Southern California. So, Rob, what's the latest you can tell us from there?
Well, Carrie, everything is pretty calm and peaceful right now. There are speakers making speeches and leading chants for a group of perhaps 1,000 students. It's a little difficult to tell exactly how many. I think the crowd has ebbed and flowed over the course of the last several hours. The students here are demanding several things, including that they stand in solidarity with Palestinians and demanding freedom for Palestine, an end to the occupation, an end to genocide in Gaza and Israel's war on Gaza. And they're also more close to home, calling for their university, USC, which is an elite institution. People pay a lot.
Watch, no one is covering, other than myself, the elephant in the room, and that is the larger borders that Israel is going to establish, probably in our lifetime. And that is the West Bank, parts of Jordan, parts of Syria, and parts of Lebanon. And that the Palestinians are going to have, there's going to be a 2-state solution, but all of them are going to be going in to Gaza. It's not going to be part of the West Bank, and it's not going to be Jerusalem. That's the big elephant in the room. The borders of Israel are going back to biblical times. Now, a lot of things have to happen. There has to be a war. There's going to have to be a lot of strife. There's going to be nations in the international community that's going to be on the side of the Palestinians, and there are going to be nations that are on the side of the Israelis. There's going to be people within the nations that are aligned with Israel that will be fighting each other. We're seeing it right now happen in the United States. But the blessing for everybody in the world will happen once the Temple Mount is rebuilt. Now, there's certain things that have to happen. The Dome of the Rock has to come down. The ashes of the red heifer have to be established. But we're getting closer to this. All right. Will we see the temple be built? I don't know. Probably not. But we're going to be seeing the beginning stages of this border increase in Israel. And we're going to see most likely the ashes of the red heifer that haven't been seen for over 2,000 years. And this is what the Muslim community does not want to hear. They know this is going to happen. Esau knows. The Sunnis and the Shias, they know this. They know this. And I had someone either email me or sent a comment in the video saying that Iran isn't Esau. The soul root of Esau, when I say soul root, it's not necessarily genetic origin. What I mean by soul root is that the personality, the attributes of there are attributes to a civilization, and there are attributes to a person. And those attributes are tied to the Sephiroths. This is Kabbalistic. It's tied to certain attributes, and those soul roots, those attributes of the nation and of the individual, in general terms, are coming from either Esau or Jacob. There's also soul roots that are part of Ishmael. All right. Now, how the Zohar, which is a very Kabbalistic text, discusses this is that there will be an alignment between Ishmael and Jacob, because Ishmael came from Abraham. Now, Esau had a line, all right, that stayed Esau, but also bred with Ishmael's line. So you have this kind of like hybrid of Ishmael and Esau. And then you also have a line that is Esau through the soul roots. All right. And so when someone says that Iran is Persian and blah, 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 the religion, for many, not all, because there are Christians also in Iran, and there are also Jews that are in Iran. But the Muslims in Iran, many of them have the soul root of Esau. Not all of them, because they may have the soul root of Ishmael. But the ones that have the soul root of Esau, this wild beast mentality, all right, that's not aligning with Ishmael and it's not aligning with Jacob, this Esau line has to be destroyed. Now, on this plane, the ASEA plane, we're using terms like genocide and all this. It's rooting out the terrorist element of Esau. That's Hamas, Hezbollah, and the funders, the theocracy in Iran. That's coming from the soul root of Esau. The Abraham Accords, that peace agreement that happened during the Trump administration, was discussed in the Zohar. All right. Many, many, many moons ago. All right. All right. Depending on, when you think it was written, some people believe that it was written in the 1st century AD. Some people think it was written maybe in the 13th century or 7th century AD. So it depends. There are different scholars that have different opinions. But the thing is it's either over 700 years old or 2,000 years old. Over 2,000 years old text, all right, which is a major cornerstone to Kabbalah, all right? And it stated that there was going to be a peace agreement between Ishmael and Jacob, fighting Esau. That is the Abraham Accord. Wake up. Wake up. And through this aligning with Ishmael and Jacob and getting rid of Esau, there's peace that starts to ensue around the world. But there's a lot of tumult that happens in the meantime because people are confused. The big elephant in the room is that the time, our history, all right, is going to be reestablished through this new border system that is going back to temple times, back to biblical times. But it's not going to be easy to do that because it's uprooting a lot of the issues. People, impurity within societies, within individuals, the reconstruction of the temple, getting the priest class ready and educated to do their job, because not everybody can do it. There's only certain types of people that can do it. There are only Kohanim that can do this, and only certain types of Kohanim. So there's a lot of like detail. And this is the reason why I read the Parah Aduma about the red heifer, about the raising of the red heifer, the burning of the red heifer, the slaughtering of the red heifer, the drawing of the water for the red heifer, the sanctification of the water with the red heifer, how you sprinkle with the sanctification of the water. The details are a lot. There's a complexity to it. There's these rules and regulations to make sure that everything is right. And a lot of things have to just hit. It's like a home run, right? Everything has to be perfect, right? To get a grand slam, right? So it's kind of similar. So, but you don't hear this in the news. They're always talking about some sort of 1960. You think the 1960 border, or even the 1948 border, or anything in the last 100 years supersedes what was written in the Old Testament? Really? You really think that? Because if you do, you are going to be in a world of hurt as this starts to develop. It's developing now. You're seeing it happen. And you're probably starting to see that the pace is increasing since October 7th. And also there's these jump diffusions, all right? Things seem to be plateauing, and then all of a sudden an event happens in the world and it changes the dynamics. You see it with what's going on with Trump too. You think that he's like starting to lose energy to win the election, and all of a sudden something happens that's totally unpredictable. And there's a jump diffusion positively for him. All right. There's a lot of negative things that are happening with the lawfare. And there's a lot of things that are very negative in the media against Netanyahu and Israel, especially with the mass graves, and we'll be covering it in this video, that puts a negative light on what's going on. But there's a bigger arc. All wars have atrocities, have, quote, war crimes. All wars. And there's a war crime that no one's talking about on the Palestinian side, the Hamas side. And that is they're embedding themselves within the population to increase the chances of collateral damage. That's a war crime. And actually, if you listen to Al Jazeera with all the collateral damage casualties, in terms of numbers, Hamas has actually, because of the embedding in the society, has been the root cause of those civilian deaths, and therefore the war crime is more on the side of Hamas than on the side of the Israelis. But that doesn't mean that Israel isn't doing war crimes. They are. All wars, all sides of war do war crimes. That's reality. Sometimes it's caught, sometimes it's not caught. So, to have this idea that there's no, that, oh, there's a war crime and everyone within the military of that particular side is evil, that's not how it works. Talk to someone that actually served in the military and actually served in combat, and you'll get a wide awakening of reality.
Money to send their children here, or students pay money themselves. Either way, as the case may be, it's a very prestigious university, and the students want it to cut all ties with Israel and to remove board members on the governing board of the college or the university who are involved in the defense industry in the United States that supplies Israel with weapons and so forth. They want to cut off any study abroad with Israeli colleges or universities, and they want, in other words, a clean break between USC and any Israeli entity. Now, it's all been very peaceful, as I said, during my time here observing this crowd. There have been no confrontations or shouting matches between individuals.
You know, the Arafat scarf that everyone's wearing, the Palestinian scarf, right? Sharon, who died several years ago, who was the prime minister of Israel, was a military veteran, had the opportunity on the battlefield to actually kill Arafat, and he actually let him go, and he regretted it. If he would have killed Arafat on the battlefield, you wouldn't have all these people running around with these Palestinian scarves, the Arafat scarf. And the lesson learned here is get the fucking job done when you can, because it gets worse and it metastasizes downstream.
Students or anything of that nature, but earlier when students were trying to set up tents in order to have a sort of camping protest 24-hour, there were some scuffles, I guess you would call them, as campus police who were armed with weapons, with firearms and clubs and wearing helmets, did intervene. They tore down the tents. At least one student was detained, I'm told, by protest organizers, but then released. And a couple of people were roughed up, but there were no serious injuries. This is a situation which has been mirrored, as you mentioned, Gary, around the country from coast to coast, where there have been other institutions and colleges and universities where arrests have been made. And this has all led to a profound debate over the right of freedom of speech on campus. On universities which are dedicated to the goal of fostering free inquiry, of fostering a culture of discovery and learning and self-expression, and now those same institutions are caught.
So you see all this huge crowd, you know, in the mall of the university, or, you know, in the yard of the university, or in front of the student center, or whatever, because there's lots of universities that this is involving, not just USC. It's involving Yale, it's involving Columbia and NYU and University of Austin, and, you know, so, yeah. And, you know, so there's all these things that are happening on campus. Kids, because they're kids, right? They're going to college, all right, to learn a certain subject matter that they're interested in. And for some, they want to go into politics or go into additional studies in graduate school, go into teaching, or go into the private sector or even the public sector, right? Through nonprofits, or, you know, work at a, you know, Fortune 500 company, maybe make their own company, whatever it is, to learn a skill. All right. And during that process, they're also learning new concepts, new cultures, because these campuses are a mix of different races, different cultures, different religions. So they get to see, they're exposed to different nationalities, different religions, different ethnicities, different points of view. And you have, especially during the general requirements for college, you know, there are these humanity type classes and speech classes where you're, you know, learning about philosophy, and you're learning about different cultures, and in your history classes, you're learning about world history and stuff like this. So in these classes, within the rubric of the class, you may, you know, have a discussion, a spirited discussion between different points of view, For example, maybe you have a class that is about Middle Eastern history, and you're now in the contemporary part of the history, and a discussion about the borders of Israel, all right, ensue between, let's say, two students. One happens to be Palestinian, another one happens to be Israeli, or one is Muslim and one's Jewish, all right? But as long as there is respectful discourse that is not out of control, then that's what the university is about. It's about the freedom of speech within the rubric of the course, all right? And that if there is doxing because of someone saying something in class, that should be frowned upon, and there should be a Chatham House rule where whatever's said in the class stays in the class, and that there's no no violence that is ensuing based on that discussion that's in class. The problem comes in is that that's much different than taking over the university and creating an environment, because these crowds are large, in some cases peaceful, in some cases not, preventing students from going to class, and also becoming an environment where it's unsafe for certain types of people. All right. Just imagine if this crowd was saying something that was, let's say, something anti-Black. I'm sure that the Black students would feel fearful. It would be their freedom of speech, but it's not appropriate. Now, in a class talking about, let's say, the history of the United States, and let's say it was dealing with the slave trade, all right, in the history class, and there was a discussion about, was the slave trade right or wrong? And let's say there was one person in the room that said the slave trade was right, and another person, let's say was Black, said that the slave trade was wrong. There may be a spirited discussion, but as long as it's controlled, meaning that it doesn't get out of hand, it's expression of opinions to try to get to some sort of common ground. That's what college is really for. All right. The problem is that we have a society that if you disagree with a particular group, you either try to convert them because you're proselytizing the group, or you demonize them to the point where you try to discredit them somehow, some way, in social media, through doxing bans, or whatever it is. All right. But still, that Chatham House rule should be in place in the classroom, because they're dealing with a topic that maybe there's a lot of friction to that topic, but it's an environment where people can express their opinion. That's much different than being in the mall or the yard of some campus and taking over the campus. These students have all the right to get a permit and protest in a public space. The university is not a public space, even as it being, let's say a state-funded university. It's not a public space. It's actually a private space. All right. And the university allows it to happen, but this is where the university gets it wrong. Freedom of expression within the classroom, as long as it's not disruptive or unsafe, should be acceptable within the context of the rubric of that class. That means that if you're in mathematics class, you don't start talking about Palestinian rights or the atrocities of the Holocaust. All right. But if you're in a class that's talking about the history of, let's say, Palestine, then that's a different situation, as long as it's in the rubric of that class. The problem comes in is that these students take over the university. And violence ensues, property gets destroyed. Many of the people that are in these protests don't even go to the university. They're almost like rent a riot, group.com or whatever it is. So the universities, where they get it wrong is they don't shut this down in its early phase, because they do not have a right to protest like this. They have a right to express freedom of expression and express freedom of ideas within the rubric of a class. If they want to do this, they should be doing this in the public sphere outside of the campus, off the campus grounds. No one's stopping them from doing that. No one's stopping them. No, they have to do it at the campus. You know why? Because they're in a protected bubble. So these rioters, these protesters, they know what they're doing. And the universities are failing, the United States, because they're creating a woke culture in the colleges that will end up getting into corporate America. But they're giving them kind of the safe haven to do all this protesting, which is not what that's not what that property is really for. That property of the university is that mall or the yard is to let students traverse from one lecture hall to another lecture hall, or one lab to another lab. Not to be an encampment. This is where the presidents of the university are failing. Students don't have this right, or they shouldn't have this right. They have the right to protest in the public sphere because of the First Amendment. But this is not the public sphere. This is a protected bubble. If they really believe in what they're doing, why isn't it in the public sphere? Why isn't it out off the campus? Because they know they can be protected. These professional rioters, these professional protesters. And the universities allow it to happen, because most of the universities are liberal run. There's the problem.
Crossroads where there are instances where they crack down on that very freedom of speech. And so that is creating a great deal of concern among the students and among a number of the professors here at USC and elsewhere. Terry.
Okay, well, thanks very much indeed for that. Let's go live now to John Hendren, who's at Columbia University in New York. John, can you give us a sense of what it's been like there with these protests?
Well, Kerry, Columbia has a long legacy of protests from the Vietnam War to today, but there's a lull at the center of this particular storm. It may be the epicenter, but look around. You've got students now putting on an extra layer after a warm day grows a little chillier. Today was a busy one here. The Speaker of the U.S. House of Representatives, Mike Johnson, came here and he spoke to Jewish students and condemned these protests, the ones here and across the country. Well, the students held a little news conference of their own, the protesters, and they made some demands. They said they're protesting the war in Gaza, but they're also protesting their university. They want to know, they want the school to disclose where it's investing its money. They want it to divest of all Israeli investments. And they want amnesty for all of the students.
Well, let's think about this. They go to a prestigious university, let's say Yale, Harvard, the Ivy League, whatever. All right? And then they're complaining on the endowment investments that allowed for the university to grow. And many of them get many students get some sort of reduction of tuition at these universities. That's coming from the endowment. So they'll benefit. They want to benefit from an Ivy League education, but they want to tell the university how to invest the money. If you don't like the policies of the university, don't go to the university. But this is the problem with the woke culture today. They want the benefits, and then they want to tell you how to run the show. You're seeing it already in, some of the Ivy League clubs, post-graduation, where you have this woke culture coming in, right? And they're trying to whitewash history because some, back in the 1800s, the portrait of XYZ happened to be a slave owner, and they want to take it down. And they want to just whitewash the history of some of these clubs. Can you imagine, in the main cocktail room at the Yale Club, where you have the portraits of the presidents that went to Yale, and obviously George Bush Sr. and Clinton and President Clinton and President George Bush Jr. portraits there. But can you imagine a woke person going in there, just finished graduating from Yale, signs up to be a club member, and then demands to bring down George Bush Sr. because, he started the war with Iraq in 1991. But that's what's happening. That is what's happening. They want to bring down the history. They want to whitewash history. You have people in New York that want to actually take down George Washington's statue at Federal Hall that's facing NYSE Stock Exchange. The first president of the United States. Why? Because he was a slave owner. The context of the time period is important. It doesn't mean that everything that these people did was all lily white. It wasn't. But they want to whitewash history. This is exactly what happened in the Cultural Revolution in China. But we're in a slow rollout of it. You have weak, ultra-liberal professors brainwashing these students, especially at the Ivy League, trying to actually tear down the history of the country. To understand the atrocities of a country, you have to make sure that you teach the full history. You don't whitewash it. You don't just tear it down and just burn it up and just not know anything. Don't you think it's important to understand General Lee during the Civil War, even though he was on the Confederacy? He was actually a military genius from West Point, even though he lost the war. But taking down his statue whitewashes history. You don't learn some of the things, some of the negative things about the Civil War and some of the positive things about the Civil War, because it's only one-sided. Same issue that the CCP did, with this whole uniparty. This is where America's going. And it's coming right out of the Ivy League, brought to you by ultra-liberal fucking professors.
They're out here and all of the other protesters, and that presumably includes the more than 100 who were arrested here last week. Since then, the university has given in a new deadline of midnight local time on Thursday as talks continue between the student protesters and the university, and as this wildfire of protest spreads across the country. But you can see how peaceful this is right now. And one reason the university president might
And it spreads because it is orchestrated by a series of groups. And these groups have even told the students that are protesting what the number they need to call for legal representation when they get arrested. This is orchestrated. This is not grassroots. And the universities allow it to happen because they allow them to do these encampments on the lawn or in the mall. What right does a student have to put, a North Face tent up for 3 days? Meanwhile, you have tons of homeless people in New York.
Looking for a way out of this conundrum is that back in 1968, another Columbia University president called in police. They violently cleared out student protesters, and that was the end of that president's stormy tenure.
John Hendren, thank you. Well, staying.
So if you start to break up the insurrection on campus, you're going to lose your job. See, they're threatening the president. See, the presidents are captured from these events. And these presidents make a lot of money, all right, of these universities. It's amazing. It's just amazing. Go to a prestigious university. Most likely, some of the tuition is subsidized by either the government or by the endowment. And then the students are going to tell you on how to invest the endowment. If you don't like the university, don't go to it. No, they want the benefits of that university. And here's the negative feedback loop. They're actually weakening the prestigeness of the university now, where large corporations don't want to deal with this bullshit. So do you really think that in the next 2 or 3 years that people are going to actually be getting good, out of college jobs from Columbia or Yale or Harvard for the next 2 or 3 years? No, they're not. And so this is why there are individuals that are applying to colleges now this season in the next tier group for schools in the United States. Some of them are actually in the South, the southern states. Because these students know that that there's going to be a memory of this for the ones that are hiring, that they don't want these woke people.
Jeremy Suri is a professor of global leadership history and public policy at the University of Texas. He joins us from Austin, Texas. Welcome to the program. We understand that you witnessed firsthand the student protest. Can you tell us what actually happened?
Sure. So I was coming out of the class I had just taught, and it is the history department on campus, and I saw a large group.
Jeremy Suri, University of Texas professor. So it's not the University of Austin, it's University of Texas. Okay, so I had the university wrong. I really think this guy needs to shave.
Students, and not a very large group, but about 200 students who had assembled on a grass lawn behind my building. It's what we call the South Mall, and it doesn't block any buildings. It's visible to many people, but it's an area that students often sit on to study and things of that sort. And these students were shouting "Free Palestine." That's all. They had maybe 1 or 2 signs. They were saying nothing anti-Semitic. They were saying nothing that was threatening. And as they were standing and shouting, I witnessed the police, the state police, the campus police, the city police, an army of police almost the size.
This is orchestrated. They want to seem peaceful in Texas, on the University of Texas, and then to try to demonize either the administration of the university or the police, because now the protesters are the ones that are oppressed. See, Remember what DEI was all about? The oppressor and the oppressed? You know about this ultra-liberalism, wokeism that's in the United States about the oppressed and the oppressor? We're seeing it in real time here. They're going to start to demonize actually shutting down these encampments to try to fuel a larger protest that was like in the 19th, like during the Vietnam era. I think the Vietnam era is totally different. One, it was during a war where people that were going to universities could be drafted. None of these students are going to be drafted, into the United States is in a draft. Maybe not yet, but so this is a lot different, right? This is actually virtue signaling where there's no real skin in the game. These students don't really have skin in the game. The ones that were protesting during the Vietnam era, which I still think was wrong, but the ones that were protesting during the Vietnam era had skin in the game because they could have been forced to enlist. So it was a little different situation that was going on with the draft, right? But again, benefit from freedoms, but not really have to serve the country. That's the generation that just came out of the baby boom generation. The baby boom generation mostly is about self-centeredness in so many different ways. It starts with them actually going to college during the draft into the Vietnam era, and they didn't want to serve their country. Most people that served didn't get killed and didn't get wounded in Vietnam. But the thing is that there was these protests on campus during the Vietnam era where they didn't want to serve their country. So they get out of college, all right? And then for many, many decades, they actually start to balloon the deficit in the United States. And inflation really takes hold. Up to the point where now it's 1970, the late 1970s, early 1980s, where there was high inflation. So when you look at the full arc of the baby boom generation, even though there's been technologies that were developed and NASA and computer industry, the semiconductor industry, I'm not saying that there wasn't benefits of the baby boomers in the United States, that generation. There were benefits, but there was also a lot of self-centeredness. Compared to the greatest generation, their parents, they actually fought in World War II. So you had their parents fight in World War II, built the hegemonic power that we have in the United States based on the ending of World War II, only to raise a bunch, I'm talking in general terms, a bunch of brats called the baby boomers that were self-centered. And now you have the millennials, the Gen Z crowd, taking a page out of their history of the 1960 protesting. And they are self-centered also. And it's even worse because the woke group that is protesting now doesn't even have skin in the game. At least the baby boomers had skin in the game.
Of the student group, collecting themselves. Many were carrying guns, many were carrying rifles. And then within a few minutes, this group of police stormed into the student crowd and started arresting students. These students were shouting "Free Palestine." They were not threatening anyone. They were peaceful. They were loud, but they were peaceful, and they were not anti-Semitic either. And
what does Free Palestine mean? That means they could control the West Bank in Jerusalem. That is antithetical to where this is all going for the Temple Mount rebuilding. That's the big elephant in the room, guys. What does Free Palestine really mean? Stop the Temple Mount?
Just started attacking them, and that led to more shouting. More students then arrived when they saw this, and the situation became more violent, but it became more violent because the police had attacked the students, not the other way around.
So what are university authorities making of all this then? Where is this actually heading?
Well, I believe that university presidents, including my own at the University of Texas, are afraid. They're afraid that they are going to be criticized and condemned by politicians, by the governor of Texas, by members of Congress. They're afraid they're going to be condemned for allowing anti-Semitism. And I'm against anti-Semitism too. I'm Jewish myself. I think anti-Semitism is horrible, and there has been too much of it. But the presidents are overreacting. And what they're doing is they're creating an environment in which no one is allowed to say anything that sounds critical in any way of Israel or any other topic. And they're making it impossible for students to express themselves. I want students to express strong opinions.
There is nothing wrong for students expressing strong opinions. But why do they have to do it on campus? They can do it in the public square off campus. They have a First Amendment. What they do is they use the campus as some sort of safe space, and it causes a little bit more disruption because they can congregate in a field, in a mall area or on the yard, and it's really good for TV. But you can't do that so easily on the streets of New York or the streets of Boston, because you have these alleyways and corridors and these streets, right? I mean, the protesting that was going on outside the gates of Columbia, they packed the street, but it doesn't have the same kind of feel on TV when you see North Face tents in the mall area. And like I said, Israel is getting cursed and blessed. There's an infighting that's going on, all right? Some of that curse is because of atrocities in war, because all wars have atrocities, right? And whoever caused crimes against humanity, war crimes, should be prosecuted, right? But all wars have it. All sides of wars have it. And that means that there are war crimes that are going on the Hamas side too. So, let's just call a spade, all right? And there's a curse that's going on with Israel. There's also a curse going on with Israel because there is infighting within the Jewish people. The ones that are more conservative in terms of religiousness versus the ones that are more liberal, that don't follow the religion. The ones that are following the edicts of the Torah and the march towards the Temple Mount being rebuilt, and the ones that don't want that. Now, you have to ask the question, why does one want the temple to be rebuilt versus the ones that don't? Independent of if they're Jewish or not. The ones that want the Temple Mount to be rebuilt is the time period where you get into the Messianic era where there's actually peace on earth. And all this fighting and all this stuff goes away. But for that to happen, certain things have to be met. And that is following Torah principles, the Old Testament principles. the mitzvahs, right? And many mitzvahs can't even be done unless there is the temple. So the religiousness of society has to be brought up to a higher level. The ultra liberals don't want that. So if you're a person that doesn't want the Temple Mount, you have to ask the question why. And when you get to the root cause of that, after you ask the question why, a few times, it'll get to the point where they're not willing to do mitzvahs. They're not willing to follow the precepts of the Old Testament. And there's the rub. There's the problem. And so you have all this infighting that's happening in society at the worldwide level between good and evil. And there is this conflict. Good will prevail. But the more kicking and screaming evil has, the more bloody it's going to be.
I want them to argue. I don't want them to say anything that's offensive to another group, and I don't want them to use violence, but we're a university. We should be encouraging free speech. Presidents of universities now are afraid of free speech, and they're suppressing free speech.
In the rubric of the classroom. So it doesn't get out of control. And the students don't have the right to just do an encampment on the lawn of a university. That's not the right. Why don't they do it in the public square, off campus? Because it's a safe space. That's why.
It's terrible. We should not allow that to happen.
Given what you say then, could this eventually lead to some kind of policy change when it comes to how institutions react to protests like this?
Well, I hope it will lead to some soul searching. I believed we had a policy until today at the University of Texas, and a policy I think most major universities had, which is that peaceful protests were encouraged. That is actually what we should be about.
Now, think about that. We write in our Constitution at the university that the students can do peaceful protesting.
Meanwhile, they just came out of the humanities class by an ultra fucking liberal professor that just told you that America's bad. And it's demonizing other, nationalities for whatever reason. And so the students get supercharged. And so this is a means to project the feelings of these ultra-liberal professors. That's why. Dr. Paul Cottrell, if you were the president of Harvard, what would you do? If it's in the rubric to have debates and spirited discussions that are controlled within the classroom, that's okay, as long as it doesn't get out of control. But these discussions shouldn't be in math class. They should be in history class and philosophy and international affairs classes. And that in the mall area, in the yard, it's serene, no protesting whatsoever. If you want to protest, it's your right, off the fucking campus. It's that simple. It's that simple. But if you have liberal professors wanting and pushing an agenda, then this is what you get. This is what you want. This is the crucible.
Policy. I would like to see us have a discussion about returning to that policy and setting clear guidelines for that policy. I do fear there are some people who want to limit free speech and limit protests at universities. What is ironic is these are the same people who a few years ago were saying we didn't have enough free speech. The same conservatives who said that we were doing too much woke diversity training are now the same people who don't want.
I have a feeling this is a liberal professor that doesn't follow the precepts of the Torah. That's my gut feeling, all right? These conservatives that he's talking about going to campus, were planned events that were in an auditorium that became out of control because the liberals didn't like what they were hearing. And they shouted down the person in, these people in the auditorium or as they were walking towards the auditorium. And it got unsafe to the point where the school decided to cancel the event. That's a huge difference, where it's in an auditorium to discuss the ideas. So when you boil this all down, the woke group wants to be able to protest what they want to protest about. But when you actually have a conservative that has a plan to actually do a speech in an auditorium to express different ideas, you can't have that. That's totally different. That's totally different than what's going on in these malls that are out of control. There's nothing wrong with having free tickets or selling tickets for some sort of liberal professor or a liberal student talking about something. Let's say even about the Palestinian cause. There's nothing wrong with that. And that should be encouraged. And hopefully on the same stage, peacefully, respectfully, the other side is also discussed. That would be ideal. But that's not what happens. What's happening is that they're going on a mall and in many cases hurting people, destroying property. A lot of these people are, green, these climate change types. All right. Don't you think the tent on the grass at Harvard or even at Columbia is going to be hurt by doing these encampments? If they care about the planet so much, why are they turning it into a dump? Literally a dump in their mall, on their yard. So what will happen is you got the liberals spinning it. Oh, you shut down our protests in the mall, but you want to have conservatives in an auditorium. Let me see this. It seems as though conservatives are a little bit more peaceful, actually. The country is being torn apart between ultra-liberalism and conservatism. Pick conservatism. In the long run, you're going to benefit. You pick this ultra-liberalism, and what's going to happen is you're going to be cursed at a metaphysical level, and you're going to be on the wrong side of history.
Discussion of other issues, and that's very dangerous. The lifeblood of intellectual work is debate and discussion.
And from what you've witnessed then firsthand.
Exactly, Professor. Exactly. Use the auditorium. Or how about telling your students to have peaceful protests in the public square off campus? But most of them won't do that. Why?
Is the resolve of students?
Well, the irony is that this kind of behavior by the police only increases the resolve of students. I cannot tell you how many students, more than 15 to 20 that I spoke with, who I saw at this event, some of whom are students I know, were students who were apathetic or may have even been favorable to the Israeli side in the argument. And they see the police acting this way, and it leads them to become more radical. And this is the story of the 1960s in our society. We're replaying that. When the police attack students in this way, it makes other students sympathize with those who are attacked, not the attackers.
Professor Jeremy.
So now the protesters are the oppressed and the oppressors are the police, even though they have no real skin in the game. It's not the Vietnam era. Trust me. It would be the Vietnam era if there was a draft for a war.
Thank you very much indeed for your time.
Thank you for covering this story.
Make sure to subscribe to.
All right, so what I want to do is I want to cover the mass graves that were found in Gaza.
We're going to begin in Gaza, where the Palestinian Civil Defense Team says evidence from mass graves in the grounds of Nasser Hospital in Khan Yunis shows the Israeli army carried out summary executions. 392 bodies have been recovered in mass graves across Gaza, but they've not been able to identify 267 of them, and at least 20 people may have been buried alive at the medical complex. Children were also among the bodies recovered. The team is accusing Israel of committing crimes against humanity. Meanwhile, international pressure is mounting on Israel after the discovery of the mass graves. U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan says Washington wants answers. The White House says reports of mass graves in Gaza are deeply disturbing. The EU and the United Nations have already called for an independent investigation. Mass graves have been discovered in Al-Shifa Hospital in Gaza City, as well as Nasser Hospital in the south. Dr. Mohammed Al-Mukhair is head of the monitoring and documenting.
Now, there is an investigation that's going on to understand what really happened. But again, all wars have war crimes. Everyone participating in a war does a war crime. The question is, does it get caught or not? And if there is a war crime, people need to be prosecuted. But there are war crimes that are happening with Hamas too.
At the Civil Defense Department in Gaza. He's joining us live from Rafah. We're going to be talking to him through a translator. So thank you very much indeed for being with us. Can you tell us how you and your team gathered the evidence?
Peace be upon you. Good evening, everyone. During our work with the Civil Defense Team, in order to recover the bodies in the medical complex of Al-Nasser, we have found mass graves within the medical complex, and one in the morgue, one in the north of the medical complex. And the civil defense team has worked in order to recover all the bodies. Most of them were decomposed bodies, and the occupation forces has changed the forms and also changed the shrouds and put them in plastic bags. We believe that those bags have accelerated the decomposition of those bodies. We have also noticed through our teams, we are trying also to document all the evidence that show that many corpses or bodies have shown signs of torture, including handcuffing, and also some other parts, some other bodies has shown that.
Now, it's possible. I don't know, because there needs to be an investigation. I'm just saying, I'm just putting out there as a hypothesis. There was news during the fighting with the hospital, with the Israelis and Hamas being embedded with the hospital, that there were people within the hospital that were being held by Hamas. So we don't know for sure yet if Israel did this or if Hamas did this. We don't know. So is this staged to make it look like that it was from Israel? Or did Israel IDF soldiers really do this? We don't know. If the Israeli soldiers did do this, they need to be held accountable. I would be on the side that the Israeli IDF probably did this, but it's unknown for sure until further investigation. So, so why doesn't the news just state it like how I just stated, instead of war crimes against Israel? All right? We don't know what really happened. We do know that people were held at the hospital against their will by Hamas. Now, is that the case? I don't know. Or is it that these these people were casualties during the conflict, and there was a mass burial of the collateral damage, and make it seem as though it's a mass grave to try to, to demonize the IDF. We don't know that either. There's a lot of, we know less than what we do know. There's a lot of things that we don't know about this situation than we do know. We do know that there are people that are dead, that are in a mass grave, but we don't not really sure how they died. And we're not really sure who tortured them, if they were tortured. And this is Al Jazeera, so you really think that they're unbiased? And again, part of the soul root of Esau is a person that tries to spin it in a way where there is a bias to try to get you on their side, right? For example, the hospital back in the early days of October 7th and the aftermath, several days later, when Israel was blamed for one of the hospitals being hit by a missile. And it so happened that the missile that Hamas launched failed in the air and fell into a car park area right next to the hospital. Meanwhile, Al Jazeera was saying that there were 50 people that were killed. And there weren't 50 people that were killed. There were about 50 burnt cars. And Al Jazeera lied to the public. And mainstream media picked up on it, thinking that it was true. So we don't know really what the real story is yet.
They were shot and gunshot. Also, we have observed that there were corpses of bodies that were completely dismembered. We also found bodies of women, young people, elderly, in the area of around the medical complex. We also have observed and found some bodies with no clothes, and all this indicated that some other bodies showed that they were being treated in the medical complex, as we have shown in the picture during the press conference that showed that one of the bodies that found was receiving treatment. We are trying to find all the evidence, establish all the evidence, how those bodies have been buried. We have also noted and observed that many bodies have been put in one bag, which is in violation of the regulations we have here. There is also clear indication that some citizens and some bodies have been buried in certain directions. We have also found some bodies masked and compiled, put 30 meters underground, while in mass graves, the distance should not be more than 1 meter.
So can you tell me what efforts you and your team have made to record and preserve the evidence that you say you found?
We have worked in very difficult conditions and very challenging. This is due to the fact that we are lacking all the needed equipment to deal with those bodies and to maintain them. We have used the equipment that we have in order to recover the bodies, and we have tried as much as possible not to open the bags in order to keep those bodies until they are moved to a clean area where we can clean them, and then we can open those bags and document all the evidence that shows that there were signs of torture and are in violation with the international law. After taking note of all those signs and evidence, we have also been able to identify all the problems shown by those bodies, and we have documented them in specialized reports. Some of the reports are likely to help the international committees that can be launched in the near future in order to investigate in those in those crimes committed by the occupation.
With the evidence that you have managed to pull together, what do you do with it now? How do you get it to an independent team to be able to analyze it?
We are ready and fully prepared in order to submit a full report documented with all the photos and evidence that we have found about those bodies. We can publish them and submit them in both Arabic and in English so that it can be a foundation for the work that can be conducted by international investigation committees. We are here ready in Gaza in order to help the work in order to refrain or to push the occupation to refrain from the crimes being committed against the people in Gaza. During our work, we have found children during those mass graves. Why do we have to find children bodies in mass graves? This confirms that the number that we are documenting of children that have died, which is more than 14,000 children, including elderly and women.
Are you concerned, sir, that if an independent team is unable to get into Gaza to be able to examine the evidence for themselves, that the evidence might become corrupted, it might become damaged, and therefore may become unusable if a case is to be brought?
I don't think so, because we have made sure to document all the evidences that we have found so far. Those bodies.
Don't you think that this should be done by a third party? Probably multiple third parties.
Identified whether those bodies were unknown or not known, known or not known. And we are keeping all the evidence that we found in order to present it to the International Investigation Committee. We will exert all our efforts in order to maintain and preserve all the evidence. We will document it properly so that we can convey the message of the Palestinian people to the world.
I want to ask you about the impact that this has been having on you and members of your team, having to go through these mass graves and collect the evidence that you have been able to pull together. What kind of effect is that having on the morale and on the personalities of people?
There is an impact, a mental impact, and also a health that is impacting our health and our morale, given that we are exposed directly to those tortures. Some members of our team have received the distress calls directly, but we were not able to reach the medical complex on time because of the situation back then. We were not able to save lives. Also, some of our teams or our members are still suffering from traumas that is also impacting the quality of the work that we can carry out. As far as their health of our teams is concerned, some of our members were contaminated, given that they were dealing directly with those bodies without having the proper precautions due to the lack of equipment. We have also lost all the specialized labs as far as forensic medicine is concerned in Gaza because of the occupation bombings and attacks, which has also hindered our work, and we were not able to establish all the needed evidence as we hoped. So we still believe that the occupation has stolen some organs. We have found some bodies with open stomach, and they were just stapled, which is also not known as a practice in forensic medicine or any kind of medicine in the health system in Gaza. We use usually the proper medical equipment and not staple the bodies.
There's something odd about this mass grave thing. Now they're saying that there's 392 bodies. Now there are so many cameras that the Palestinians, the Gazans have, during this whole war effort that's been going on, and the tactical movement of the IDF, in this urban warfare kind of environment where they hit buildings and then they go in. How do you bury in mass 392 people without any of the Gazans knowing? Something is fishy. Something is fishy. This is not a mass grave way out in some sort of rural area in Ukraine, where we've heard these mass graves in Ukraine, all right? This is in an urban environment. Something doesn't make sense. I have a feeling that they were actually buried by the Gazans. I can't prove it, but I'm just saying that I have this feeling that something doesn't make sense here.
Final question, sir. What would you hope that international organizations who look at your evidence would do with it now?
We hope to establish the clear evidence that the occupation has committed crimes and killed on purpose thousands of Palestinians in Gaza. They have used all kinds of tortures and violated all the privacy of our people and their dignity. The occupation has committed crimes and has killed all forms of life in Gaza. They took pleasure in doing so and destroying life in Gaza. We hope that there will be a clear report that will emanate from the investigation to prove and establish an evidence of all the occupation crimes being committed in Gaza.
Dr. Mohammed Al-Mukher, we appreciate you being with us on Al Jazeera. Thank you very much indeed. I'm going to bring in...
Before we go to the next segment here, please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get the health products that I offer. I have this silver gel that you put this gel on your skin. It neutralizes pathogens. You put it around your mouth, lightly coat your nostrils, around your nose, around your eyes, around your ears, and it will neutralize pathogens for approximately 5 hours. In addition, it will help to improve your skin if you apply it every day on your skin, especially your face before you go to bed, and then you exfoliate afterwards. It's part of my skincare protocol. You can get one of the anti-aging boxes for skin health on my store also under the anti-aging boxes section of the store. But the individual product is the silver gel. Put this also on a wound. It'll help to heal it quicker. It'll keep it from getting infected. And you can also apply it on minor burns and abrasions and on other irritation like bug bites, rashes, or acne. So this is multi-purpose. So please go to my store, get the silver gel, and it'll benefit your skin, but also it can be used as a means to neutralize pathogens. Since we are in the allergy season, please go to my store and get the lozenges and the drops that I have. I have Manuka honey in a 21 count for lozenges. I also have it in elderberry zinc, which is a popular item, in a 21 count. And I have drops, which are smaller than lozenges, in a 100 count. I have it in honey lemon and also in blueberry. These lozenges and drops have structural nanosilver in it. And what that does is it helps to neutralize the pathogen. It'll soothe that throat, reduce that irritation, maintain that mucosal barrier that you need in this upper area of your oral canal. And by doing that, you're reducing further problems during the allergy season. Get a few bags of this for your household. You're going to be thanking me, when you do, start to have these hypersensitivity reactions, especially type 1. So please go to the store and get the lozenges and the drops. It's the-studio-reykjavik.com.
Robertson is an international lawyer and former United Nations war crimes judge. He was also president of the War Crimes Court in Sierra Leone. He's joining us live now from London. Good to have you with us on Al Jazeera, sir. This is one of the fundamental problems that Dr. Al-Mohage was pointing out, isn't it? The difficulty of collecting evidence, tangible evidence, inside a war zone.
Well, it's been a long history. We now have many forensic doctors who have had the rather grisly task of combing through mass graves and examining victims to establish how they died. And that is what is now essential to get to the bottom of this true atrocity. It's a crime against humanity.
It's very important to keep in mind that this could have been a mass grave and the burial was done by Hamas. I'm not saying for sure that's the case. We just don't know. And they may find out on how these individuals died. But until there is like proof positive that this was done by the IDF, you need to keep an open mind. It's very fishy to me that 392 bodies in a mass grave are buried in an urban setting without any Palestinians knowing while the IDF is doing this. And there's no cameras on this. That seems awfully fishy to me.
And there must be an independent inquiry, although Israel does not accept independence. When 7 aid workers were killed by drones the other day, they simply sacked the 2 officials responsible and said it was a tragedy. It wasn't a tragedy, it was a crime of manslaughter by negligence. But of course, the Israeli government would not allow any prosecution or any independent inquiry. This case cries out for an independent inquiry, and the sooner the better. The Gaza Health Authority is party free of this slip. And it's job.
Jeffrey Robertson, unfortunately, your line there is breaking up, and I apologize for interrupting you, but I hope you can still hear me. I do want to ask about one of the points that Dr. Al-Mohage was making in terms of how they present the evidence to the rest of the world to be investigated. That he was suggesting that they would make the evidence available in Arabic and in English. One would imagine that the bulk of that may well be online until such times as a team can get to see it in person. In terms of bringing a prosecution or making in terms of the validity of that evidence, would it be enough just to be able to present that evidence online, or is it absolutely essential that investigators get to see that evidence in person?
It would not be enough, because people would say that the Hamas Health Authority was party free. So you have to have, for the sake of the Israelis as well as the Palestinians, an independent inquiry. And the real question of getting a team of experienced forensic.
For sure, there needs to be independent inquiry, independent investigators from multiple agencies to make sure there's not bias and get to the bottom of this. All wars, like I've said, all wars have war crimes by both sides. All right. So to say that Israel doesn't do war crimes is bullshit. They do war crimes. All right. But it's not the whole IDF. To say that it's the whole IDF is bullshit. all of Hamas, right? To say that all Hamas does war crimes is bullshit also. But Hamas does war crimes, aka October 7th, aka embedding into the population, which is a war crime. So, you know, both sides do war crimes, and the ones that the individuals that did them should be held accountable. But what's happening in the international community is that it's being spun in a way where you have to demonize all of the IDF, all of Israel's government. And don't worry about what Hamas has been doing. People that engage in warfare that cause war crimes need to be held accountable. It's independent of which side they're on. The United States causes war crimes, right? Certain soldiers, and they should be held accountable. Many have been held accountable. Some people aren't held accountable because you'd be shocked that a lot of war crimes aren't even found. We did lots of war crimes in Vietnam. We did lots of war crimes during Iraq and Afghanistan and in Syria. There were war crimes that were going on even during the Civil War on both sides, the North and the South. Every war has them. Got to get to the bottom. Who are the soldiers? And they need to be held accountable, even if they were IDF. But if it's proven that this was an orchestrated thing with Hamas to try to demonize the IDF, which we don't know yet, if that's the case, then the international community needs to shine a light on Hamas and the way they spin the news.
Doctors and a prosecutor or judge with an international reputation into Gaza. I mean, the Kerem Khan, the head of the International Criminal Court prosecution, was not allowed into Gaza. So I think this is the point at which America has to step up. It's got a number of eminent prosecutors and experts. I'm sure it can put a team together, and it will have to insist, because this has caused outrage in the international community. It will have to insist on a truly independent investigation, independent of both the Hamas authorities and the Israeli government. It will have to have the ability to question those Israeli officers in the vicinity to establish how this horror came about and who is responsible. That is only the questions being asked by the European Union, by governments around the world, can only be answered by an inquiry which is independent of both sides. But because this is a crime against humanity,
this is in Khan Yunis, all right, which the Israelis have left that region and are now focusing on the operations in Rafah. All right. This is where the hospital was. I am shocked that 392 bodies are being buried in mass by the IDF because of some sort of war crime, and no one watched on the Palestinian side. Something's odd about this. Something is odd. I'm not saying it didn't happen by the IDF. I'm just saying there's a lot that needs to be answered on both sides of the fence, on the Israeli side and on the Palestinian side.
Requires a full and independent and transparent investigation.
Jeffrey Robertson, international lawyer, former United Nations war crimes judge. So we have
Okay, I'm going to drop into that was it. That was the. I'm going to drop into the live feed to Al Jazeera. That was a feed that was just a segment that was uploaded.
And their voices demanding their university accepts no funding from Israel. Let's go live to John Hendren, who's outside Columbia University in New York. John, despite these arrests, we've seen these protests continue to grow day in and day out. Can you give us a sense of what it's like there?
That's true. I mean, yesterday at the University of Texas at Austin and the University of Southern California, there were arrests. Princeton had students that had camped out there. That's near here. And here at Columbia, the epicenter of this protest movement, they've got a deadline happening at midnight on Thursday, local time. That's about 4 Greenwich Mean Time, when the university president, Manouch Shafiq, has ordered them to leave. They have a tent camp inside there. We were able to show it to you yesterday, but today they're not letting us inside as of yet. We hope to get in later to take another look. But those students are camped out in the center of the university on a grassy knoll. And they've got tents up, about 80 of them, and there are hundreds of students out there. They made some demands yesterday. They said they want the university to disclose all of its investments and to divest of military investments in anything that might benefit Israel or Israel's war in Gaza. And they want amnesty for the students who have been protesting. And that's important because some of these students they've been arrested, some of them have been suspended, and there have been threats of expulsion here at Princeton and elsewhere. So they've got demands. They want the university to meet, and those talks are going on. And they might go on past midnight here at Columbia, but this isn't going to stop even if their demands are met. The students across the nation, as you can see, are continuing those protests, and that movement is only growing.
And John, do you get the sense that rhetoric coming from the White House is perhaps softening, given the scale of these demonstrations, these protests at different universities? Only a few days ago, the White House said this, calling these protests blatant anti-Semitic rhetoric. Do you think the White House is prepared to change its tune on how it perceives these protests?
I think if President Biden doesn't change his tune on this particular subject, it's going to hurt him badly in November.
I want someone to tell me, what does free Palestine really mean? What does that really mean? Because if that means that they should have the West Bank and Jerusalem, it's antithetical to what the Old Testament said. And since the red heifer is probably going to be burnt on the altar this year, probably, that starts the countdown for the temple, which is going to be antithetical to, quote, free Palestine. Will there be a two-state solution? Most likely, but it's going to be Gaza. It's not going to be part of the West Bank. It's definitely not going to be part of Jerusalem. And it's not going to involve the Dome of the Rock. That's the big elephant in the room that no one's talking about. And everyone is saying free Palestine, free Palestine. They don't want the Temple Mount. It's a part of their evil inclination to reach, to express that they don't want the rebooting of the machine that was, around over 2,000 years ago, aka the temple. That's the big elephant in the room.
Time in Dearborn, Michigan, which has a large Arab and Muslim American population. And the voters I spoke to there said they simply can't vote for Biden if he does not initiate a ceasefire in Gaza. And of course, we all asked them, well, doesn't that mean you're assisting Donald Trump? They said, it doesn't matter. If you're not with us on this one issue, we're not with you. And the president has seen his poll numbers hurt with young Americans, with particularly liberal Americans, with Muslim and Arab Americans, and even with some Jewish voters who sympathize with the pro-Palestinian movement. So the White House is clearly trying to thread a central path through this just as the university president behind me is trying to do the same thing. And just to put this into context, she had about 100 students arrested last Thursday in the middle of the square. They just came back and reoccupied the square. In 1968, another university president here at Columbia did the same thing during a Vietnam protest, cleared out a bunch of students violently in that case. And that was the end of a stormy tenure for that particular president. This president is worried about the same thing. And at the White House, President Biden has his own worries. In November, he's up for re-election again.
Yeah, certainly lessons from the past there, John. John Hendra there in New York. Thank you. Israel's army is also carrying out operations along the border with Lebanon. There have been several airstrikes targeting areas in the villages of al-Shab and Nakura, that's in southern Lebanon. Tona Hodden has more from Marjayoun at the border with Israel.
It's becoming a higher intensity conflict along the Lebanon-Israel border, a different phase. So we are seeing an intensification of the fighting.
Like I said, right after October 7th of last year, this is going to be a multi-front war in Israel. Why? Because however this ends up, it's going to expand the borders of Israel. That means the Sinai Peninsula, that means the West Bank, that means parts of Jordan, that means parts of Syria and Lebanon. And all of Jerusalem. And the Muslims are going to fucking have a shit fit.
From both sides, Israel carrying out numerous airstrikes on what it calls Hezbollah targets along the border, saying that it is taking out weapons depots and going after fighters. At the same time, Hezbollah too increasing the tempo of its operations, no longer just targeting along the border. On Tuesday, they targeted deep inside Israel, some 15 kilometers north of the city of Akka. That is a coastal city. Yes, the target was a military base, but it is an area where there are still civilians. Civilians have to take shelter in bunkers. So both sides really sending messages to each other. Hezbollah saying that it is ready to escalate if Israel continues, to escalate on this side of the border, going after its fighters and its field commanders in targeted assassinations.
I'm really willing to bet that the Muslim community that orchestrated October 7th attack, Hamas in general, but also Hezbollah, and then the coordination with the theocracy in Iran, all right? They kicked a hornet's nest, and now they are, they're surprised of, how this is starting to snowball into a larger conflict. But again, it seems to me that the borders of Israel in biblical times are being reestablished. Now, it doesn't mean it's going to be done in, snap of the fingers. And it doesn't mean it's going to be all done in 1 year. This is probably a multi-year pronged thing that's going to happen. But these events, October 7th is a catalyst of a larger event that is happening. It's not just Palestine, the Palestinians versus the Israelis about borders. This is much, much deeper. That's why I use the term soul root, between Esau and the soul root of Jacob. Now, it's up to you what side you want to be on. All right? But one side's going to be cursed and the other side's going to be blessed. I think it's going to be, the blessing is going to come to Jacob, not to Esau. But, maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think so.
Appreciate it. Thank you very much indeed.
What What Israel wants is for Hezbollah to pull back. It wants Hezbollah fighters to pull back from the border. But despite thousands of strikes, Hezbollah is still along the border, launching attacks from the border. So are we going to see a further escalation as each side tries to get a better position on the bargaining table? But what is clear is that this is going to remain an active front line as long as the war on Gaza continues, because Hezbollah says there will be no halt to the fighting until there is a permanent ceasefire in Gaza. Zana Khuder, Al Jazeera, Southern Lebanon.
Israeli forces have shot and killed a teenager in the occupied West Bank. The Palestinian Ministry of Health says 16-year-old Khaled Raid Suleiman Arouk was shot in the chest during a raid in Ramallah. The number of Palestinians killed in the occupied West Bank since October the 7th now stands at 488. Well, the war on Gaza has led to renewed calls to boycott Israeli products. For years, Palestinians have urged international sanctions to be imposed in order to pressure Israel to end its occupation. But for those in the occupied West Bank, Israel's stranglehold on the economy is a major obstacle for the boycott movement. Ida Ibrahim has this report from Bethlehem.
Living on occupied land, Salma Anaftawi doesn't want to buy the occupiers' products. Known as the youngest member of the Palestinian boycott campaign, she says it's a way of resisting the occupation.
I'm aware that Israel controls our lives and our economy. Our electricity, water, and fuel are from them, so we can't fully boycott. But even if I inflict 35% losses on them, it's the least I could do.
As Israel controls their economy, Palestinians are left with little to no free choice. Since the war on Gaza, activists worldwide renewed calls for boycotts and sanctions against Israel, arguing that this non-violent approach played a major role in ending apartheid in South Africa. This Libyan advert equates buying from companies that support Israel with funding the genocide against Palestinians that has cost brands such as KFC and Starbucks. At home, recent boycott campaigns encouraged Palestinians to support their national products, such as this 4-year-old soda factory in the north of the occupied West Bank. Competing with international brands was difficult, its owners say, but sales were boosted recently. Soon, their soda will make its way to shops in Jordan, where boycott calls are strong.
The Israeli authorities complicate our process. They impose high taxes and delay the imports and exports. They don't want Palestinians to be independent or to have an industrial economy. They only want us to be workers and depend on the Israeli market.
Palestinians do not control their borders and have to suffer Israeli restrictions on Palestinian imports, exports, and foreign currency.
What I want to do is I want to go to Democracy Now! About the graves here. All right, but before I do that, please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com. It is important that you boost up your immune system, especially in the aftershock of the crisis that we had in 2020. By having a boosted immune system, you're going to be able to fight cancer better. Weakened immune systems can't fight cancer as well. It's really important to boost up your immune system. If you follow what I am doing, and if you follow my advice, you're going to improve your chances of boosting up your immune system. Go to my store and get the lignans, and this is a powder. You mix it with your food, you take it every day, and it's going to help to boost up your immune system. All right? It's part of this protocol to boost up your immune system and slow down aging. Also, it's really important in the post, era of the crisis that we went through to make sure that you have a good gut biome. All right? There has been evidence to show that the gut biome has been disrupted during the crisis. So please make sure that you get a good probiotic. I have 2 different probiotics. I have one in a powdered form and one in a tablet form. I take the powdered one every day. I mix it with food. You can mix it with water also. Take it every day, and it'll help to improve your gut biome. It'll help to improve energy absorption and that metabolism that you need, and that communication between your gut and your liver and your gut and your brain. So please, it's really important to take a good probiotic every day. There's a little scooper in here. You just take a little scoop of it, mix it with your food or water, and take it every day. In addition, it's really important to take resveratrol. This helps to get rid of senesced cells. It's also an antioxidant. It's part of my anti-aging protocol. And by getting rid of senesced cells, your tissue that gets rejuvenated by adult stem cells will actually start to populate from those adult stem cells, and the actual telomere lengths will be longer on average. The problem with senesced cells is the telomere lengths are small, and you want to get rid of those cells. So go to my store and get the resveratrol.
Over 320 bodies are still recovering bodies from mass graves found at the Nasser medical complex for the 6th day in a row following Israel's siege on the hospital. Over 320 bodies have so far been discovered, including women, children, patients, and medical staff, according to Al Jazeera. Another mass grave with up to 400 bodies was discovered weeks earlier at Al-Shifa Hospital in Gaza City. Civil defense officials have said bodies were found stacked together and showed indications of field executions or being buried alive. The United Nations and the European Union have called for an independent probe into the mass graves, and the White House on Wednesday also called for an investigation. This comes as Israel continues its bombardment of Gaza, with at least 43 people killed over the last 24 hours, according to the Palestinian Health Ministry. At least 5 of them were killed in the southern city of Rafah, where Israel has conducted near daily airstrikes as it prepares for an offensive in the city.
A spokesperson for Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's government told Reuters Israel is moving ahead with a ground operation in Rafah, but gave no timeline. An unnamed Israeli defense official said Israel had bought 40,000 tents, each able to hold between 10 and 12 people, to house Palestinians evacuated from Rafah ahead of its assault on the city. Israeli news outlets report Israel will forcibly evacuate civilians to the nearby city of Khan Yunis, which has been virtually destroyed by Israeli forces. Over 1.3 million Palestinians are seeking shelter in Rafah, the southernmost city in Gaza. We go now to Rafah in Gaza, where we're joined by Akram Al-Sahari, a journalist based in Gaza. Welcome back to Democracy Now!, Akram. Just moments ago, Palestinian officials held a press conference in Rafah regarding the mass graves at the Nasser Medical Complex. Can you tell us the latest? I know there's a delay in the broadcast.
Good morning, Amy, to you and all the viewers. I have just come back from Khan Yunis area. I was at Nasser Hospital. I spoke to the civil defense officer who is now giving this press conference about the situation in Nasser Hospital and about the number of the people who were killed, the way they were killed, and an account of the potential suffering they have been seeing even before they did. It looks like the mass graves, the 3 different mass graves, are containing around 700 bodies. Up to this particular moment, around 400 bodies were unearthed and discovered. Around 300 bodies or even more are still in the ground. The bulldozer, one bulldozer, because of the very limited resources, is working there for the sake of just digging out the bodies. Family members are lined up there. Family members are trying and rushing with passion and with great deal of sorrow to identify the bodies of their dears. Some of them manage to identify the bodies. Then you hear the outcry, you hear the people screaming, crying, and mourning the death of their dears, but at the very same time, they feel a little bit relieved because they finally found the body of their dears. I spoke to a mother who's around 42, 43 years old. She was trying to identify her son, and then she found the body of her son. She was crying. The sister, also her daughter, was crying, and they were calling for the family to come and join them in the burial, because in our culture as Muslims and Arabs, we find a burial as the best fitting homage for the people who are dead. People are continuously digging out the bodies. People are continuously, and this is very ironic, they're trying to save the dead. people, when they die, are supposed to be resting in peace. And I was saying that people in Gaza, when they die, they're neither resting nor in peace. The bodies, those bodies, were collected twice by the Israeli occupation forces. They were taken for some forensic investigation. They were returned to Nasser Hospital. They're stockpiled in this very big hall, 3 different halls, and then they were buried. And then a second time, the Israeli occupation forces came back to Nasser Hospital. They invaded all different departments of the hospital. They targeted the specialized surgery department, the reception and emergency, and they once again unearthed those hundreds of bodies and took them once again. And then they returned them to this mass grave or mass grave. So the suffering, even for the dead people in Gaza, is still continuous, and the heartache for their families is non-stop. Every single body that is being unearthed, you find tens of people rushing for the sake of identifying whether those are their relatives or otherwise. You see also many families looking into these individual graves in the Nasser Hospital area. You see written on the tombstone that this guy is a tall guy, he has a long hair, he's wearing a gray shirt, and this is all we know. And then it's up to the family to try and to find and for people to recall what their dears were wearing the day they were parting from them, what were they wearing the day they were killed. So a very emotionally draining process. The numbers are quite shocking, but the account of the loss and the death that led to that eventual mass grave is extremely shocking, where some of the people, like you have just said, some of the people were tied, some of the people had medical accessories in their hands, like the cannulas, and when they were unearthed from the ground, it was apparent that they were buried alive. Some people were tortured, some of the bodies were extremely mutilated, which means that those bodies, some of their organs were taken by the Israeli occupation. Some lost their eyes. I could see some bodies with no eyes. I could see some bodies with no liver, with no kidney. Some bodies that are, you see them like the outer skin is just covering the skeleton, and that's it. So the account of that experience is quite heart-wrenching. The families that have been suffering for the sake of just identifying their deeds are also broken. They have been crying, but at least they say, we feel comfortable because we found our dears. So it gives you an insight, a glimpse into the suffering people of Gaza have been living. It gives you a glimpse into the bereavement the women, men, children, and girls in Gaza have been experiencing for the last 6 months or so.
The live feed from Al Jazeera is talking about how MIT is receiving money from the Israeli government of the tune of about $11 million. And they're publishing the professors that are, and the researchers that are receiving that money for their grants. All right. What about the students also publishing the professors and the universities that are getting money from Arab nations, and how these universities are being captured by Muslim countries? No, they're only going to focus on the Israelis. You know, see how this is being played out now? What about the money that was being donated by Saudi Arabia and Dubai?
Well, Sadri, just for our audience to know, whenever we speak to you, we have, there's this constant noise around you, and those are drones, of course, flying overhead, as they have been for months now. But if you could respond, the European Union, the United Nations, and now also the United States have called for an independent investigation into these mass graves. So your response to that? And we're speaking to you in Rafah. If you could also describe what conditions there are on the ground.
Well, as to the independent scrutiny or investigation committee that needs to be developed, I've been working in journalism for around 16 years now. I have been hearing about the independent committees, commissions, inquiries, fact-finding committees, and international reports and tribunals about the situation in Gaza, looking into the particular details of the incidents that were taking place, investigating the death of several people in mass killing incidents, including the war in 2008, the war in 2014, and the war in 2021. I have been hearing a book about Gaza and the war in Gaza from 2014, and I was reading the exact word that I'm going to say now. Palestinians struggle to dig out the bodies. So this is something that happened in 2014. This is something that happened in 2008. This is something that happened in 21, 22, and it's still happening throughout 2023 and 2024. The international community has failed to preserve and observe the dictates of the international humanitarian law. The humanity at large is facing a challenge. All the political systems worldwide are asked now and expected to do something tangible for the sake of just saving the Gaza Strip. Rhetoric is no longer needed. Rhetoric is no longer satisfactory. We need them to do something tangible to stop the things that are happening in Gaza. Some of the things that Gazans are suggesting, the no-fly zone to protect the civilians in Gaza. Some of the things that Gazans are suggesting, that Israel should be held accountable for what they call crimes that were committed against humanity, against people, against civilians. The international humanitarian law is rich with terms and vocab that are related to what they call the civil objects. Civil objects that are protected, journalists that are protected, medical teams that are supposed to be protected, medical facilities that are supposed also to be protected. But when you review the shocking numbers about the way that the journalists are being killed, for instance, the medical teams are being killed, for instance, you conclude that the international community is failing so far to do something tangible rather than the statements, the condemnations.
Mark my words, this is moving towards a much bigger event that's happening in the Middle East. This is PNN, and we have to go to commercial. Please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get the turmeric. Turmeric is really important to bring down that inflammation. It's also an antioxidant. It's part of my protocol to bring down that inflammation. It's one of the pillars. Ashwagandha is also part of that, to bring down inflammation and to control the glucose levels in your blood. Get the ashwagandha root. And to help to boost up your immune system, also to improve your skin. And it's also an antioxidant, vitamin C. Take a double dose of it if you are not feeling well. Take it every day with water, because it's water soluble.
Calls for independent inquiries or commissions to look into the investigation. We need something tangible. And that something tangible has not been achieved so far. And Gazans have been dying constantly because of that. Something should be done. Something swift should be done. Otherwise, the death would continue. Now in Gaza today, 79 people were killed. And an average number of around 65 to 79 is killed every day. And if nothing is done, this means the international community accepts the killing of Gazans and accepts the justification of Israel to continue that killing. Sorry. And when it comes to the situation in Rafah, around 1.4 to 1.2 million, because of the influx of people from Rafah in the last few days. People are so scared because of the looming ground operation. They understand that the Israeli operation is going to target them, and they understand that death would be chasing them. So some of them moved from Rafah. Around 150,000 Gazans have already left Rafah and moved to the area in Al-Mawasi.
The metaphysics of this, all right? Lots of children, lots of families that are not part of the military apparatus with Hamas are being affected by this war between Hamas and Israel. But the thing here is that Esau cannot have the Temple Mount to be rebuilt at a metaphysical level, at a spiritual level. They can't allow the Jews to have the Temple Mount. and that this red heifer, they know, is a very strong spiritual purification process for the Jews that will start the countdown where these events that I'm talking about will accelerate. Now, it doesn't mean it's going to be done in a year. It doesn't mean it's going to be done, you know, in 5 years or in a month. But there's going to be these rapid processes that leads to going back to biblical precepts, borders, the making of you know, building up the temple, purification of the priests, all these things that have to take place. A lot has to, very complex things have to take place. All right. But the soul root of Esau doesn't want that because it knows that it's going to start losing power. All right. You're seeing the fits of a child, right, when you're taking away their toy. All right. Esau's toy is being taken away. The Dome of the Rock is slowly being taken away. You don't see it. It's not in the news, but that's what's really happening here. The Dome of the Rock is being taken away from Esau, and the Temple Mount is going to be rebuilt. And so you see the way Esau works through entangling with Satan is show the atrocities of Jacob. Never mind, peace was actually starting to happen in the Middle East through the Abraham Accord, and they decided to launch rockets and do atrocities on October 7th, Hamas, right? So there is a strong projection to try to demonize the soul root of Jacob. It's what we would call emotional fallacy. But it still gets back to, why are these things happening? Well, Hamas attacked Israel. Why does Hamas attack Israel? Because it knows about the red heifer. All right. So this all goes back to who has the covenant. Now, it's very clear on who has the covenant based on the Old Testament. All right. So they don't have the birthright. The birthright is not, it doesn't get nullified no matter what happens. You know, and the Jewish people, in terms of religiosity, you know, ebbs and flows. All right. But you're seeing this fit from Esau. And yes, there is, on this plane, the Asiya plane, there is atrocities and collateral damage of families and of children in Gaza. But above Asiya, there is this battle that's going on between the soul roots. And when you're looking at this ebb and flow of the soul roots, Esau, in the long haul here, in the hundreds of years wavelength, is starting to decline, while Jacob is starting the ascent. They know this. The Esau soul knows this. And this is why it's trying to get the international community, because a big part of the international community actually has a stronger affinity to Jacob than to Esau. The international community is a little mixed. There's a little bit of Esau, but a lot of Jacob. So it has a stronger affinity to Jacob, but a little bit of affinity to Esau. So Esau, in the metaphysical plane, is trying to latch on to that affinity to get the international community to feel that their cause is just. But the reality of the situation is that the wavelength, the multiple hundreds of years wavelength, is moving for Jacob and moving negatively for Esau. So I know this sounds a little crazy, but watch the news in the terms of metaphysics, and you'll start to see what's playing out. That doesn't mean that Jacob, Israel, IDF does everything right. They don't. That doesn't mean that Hamas does everything wrong either. But there is this ebb and flow of the soul roots in the long hundreds of year wavelength where they're inversely related. Jacob and Esau are inversely related. Esau is in power for X amount of years, and then all of a sudden there's Jacob that's in power for X number of years. And during this ascent for Jacob, it's going to be the building of the Temple Mount. Now, hopefully we see it in our lifetime, but we might not. But we're seeing the setting of the stage. We're seeing the foundational part of this evolve. So watch the news in terms of the metaphysics, and you'll start to see this pattern that I'm talking about. But Esau has a tendency to try to latch on to the international community to try to get sympathy, because the international community has mostly Jacob, but a part of Esau in its soul root.
Between Rafah and Khan Yunis in the hope that they would survive. The ones who are in Rafah and the ones who are in Khan Yunis and the ones in Gaza, at the entirety of Gaza, are on all IDPs, around 2.1 million IDPs, because of the destruction of the infrastructure, the destruction of the homes, the destruction of the streets, and because of the continuous bombardment that has been taking their life. And those people are living in areas that have no infrastructure. No infrastructure means that they don't have water supplies that are regular. They don't have sewage systems. They don't have food. They don't have even drinkable water that with which they can cook the food. They don't have houses. They're living in tents. And today is a very hot day. Today and yesterday were very hot days in this specific season. Now people in the tents are struggling. They're sweating all day. The children that have respiratory, even the others that have some respiratory disorders, are suffering more than any other people. And this suffering is continuous. And this situation, when it comes to the humanitarian situation in Gaza, is unbearable, unimaginable, and unacceptable. When I tell you the situation is unimaginable, because for me, some parts of Gaza and some part of those camps that I have seen, the suffering of the people is unimaginable. You see them living just by the minimum, and even there is no minimum, and they have no other choice to continue living and waiting and hoping some solution would be developed or concluded sometime. So this is the truth about the situation. Something I have never seen in my life, let alone someone who's living thousands of miles away from Gaza. People are buried in the streets. People are buried on the pavements. People are buried everywhere in their homes, and some of the bodies, around 10,000 bodies, are in Gaza, are still under the rubble, and they have not been retrieved so far. You walk down the streets and you smell death everywhere. You go to the hospital that is supposed to be the temple of protection and humanity. You find the hospital totally devastated by death. You find the patients who are supposed to be receiving the medical treatments buried within the hospital, and you smell their decomposed body after the bodies were desecrated and unearthed. And wherever you turn your face, you see the children, you see the adults, you see the women and the men, the girls and the boys suffering from that unjust situation that is still continuous, and no one single international power could stop that or bring an end to that ongoing suffering and misery.
Akram al-Sattari, we want to thank you so much for being with us. Be safe. Akram is a Gaza-based journalist speaking to us from Rafah.
All right, so that was Democracy Now. Now, here's another
Democracy Now! About the war crimes, international law.
This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Nermin Sheikh.
The world is reaping a harvest of terrifying consequences from escalating conflict and the near breakdown of international law. Amnesty International said yesterday as it launched its annual report on human rights in 155 countries. The report highlights Israel's assault on Gaza with evidence of war crimes continuing to mount, as well as U.S. failures to denounce rights violations committed by Israel. It also called out Russia's ongoing aggression against Ukraine and pointed to the rise of authoritarianism and massive rights violations in Sudan, Ethiopia, and Myanmar.
Amnesty International Secretary General Agnes Callamard said, quote, Israel's flagrant disregard for international law is compounded by the failures of its allies to stop the indescribable civilian bloodshed meted out in Gaza. Many of those allies were the very architects of that post-World War II system of law, end quote. Well, Agnes Callamard joins us now from London. Welcome to Democracy Now! We so appreciate you being on with us. If you can start off by talking about the situation in Gaza right now. You just heard in our previous segment the Gaza-based journalist describing this discovery of the hundreds of bodies in a mass grave at the Nasser Medical Complex following Israel's siege of the hospital. What are you calling for right now?
Thank you very much for welcoming me on your program. I've listened to the journalist, and what can I add more? Since October 7, we have been documented a plethora of violations committed first by Hamas and then by the Israeli authorities. But in particular, the Israeli authorities have been, have committed an extraordinary amount of violations of international law. The indiscriminate and targeted bombing of civilians. We know now that there is at least 30,000 of them that have been killed. 70% of the infrastructure of Gaza have been destroyed. I'm talking
She's not mentioning that they're targeting Hamas, and she doesn't give you the numbers that were killed that were Hamas. Yes, there are a lot of people that were killed through collateral damage. But why is Hamas embedding themselves in the population if they care about the population? Oh, they don't care about the population because they want the sympathy of the international community. See how Hamas works? Oh, by the way, that's a war crime.
Infrastructures, schools, hospitals, cemeteries, cultural institutions. We know that there has been the highest number of journalists killed in any conflict, the highest number of humanitarian workers killed in any conflict. We know that famine is being used as a weapon of war. We know that collective punishment has been waged against the Palestinian people. And we also now know of clear evidence of extrajudicial killings, as highlighted by the discovery of those mass graves that are coming on top of all the detentions and use of torture and ill treatment. So the scale of the violations committed over the last 6 months is unprecedented. And I want to insist on that. It is unprecedented. The harm to civilians is unprecedented. And what is making matters worse is that this is all broadcasted every day in front of our very eyes, and yet nothing is being done to prevent that bloodshed. The United States has been using its right of veto at the Security Council to prevent any kind of meaningful intervention. It has shielded Israel from the denunciation that was required. It has protected them. It has pretended for the longest period of time that no violations were committed. This is why Amnesty International is concluding that the international system is on the brink of collapse right now. International law is not just violated.
And just like I said in October and November, that events are going to emerge that's going to show that the international community, especially the UN, needs to be disassembled, destroyed. Needs to be put in a box and put it in a closet and never opened again, or maybe dumped in the Atlantic Ocean. The international community is what is causing a lot of this globalization and one world government. So now the metaphysics of this, now think about the metaphysics of this. There is a group of people using the international community to try to usher in a one world government. All right. And many people that want right of determination, sovereignty of its own nation, would have to side on the dismantling of that world order to maintain country sovereignty. Now, these events that are taking place are showing some of the holes, some of the problems with the international community. It's the metaphysics of this is showing that the international community has failed because it's cited on one world government, powerful puppet masters, and they didn't really care about the average citizen of a particular country. They didn't care about how they were damaging certain types of people around the world. So you have this metaphysical event where Jacob is battling Esau, and believe me, the one world government is that side of that is rooted in Esau. All right, it's rooted in an attachment of Satan with Esau. So to kill Esau, the soul root of Esau, and to kill Satan, you have to destroy the apparatus that has built up the one world government. So she's right. What's going on is we're starting to see the crackings of the international community. But that's what was supposed to happen at the metaphysical level for Jacob to rebuild the Temple Mount. Because what's going to happen is that there's going to be peace on this earth in the Messianic era. And there's still going to be nation states, right? There's still going to be nations. There's still going to be constitutions and all this stuff, right? But it resets the international community. And it's no longer the UN. It's no longer these institutions that have been holding true freedom back. So I see this as a positive, not a negative. But the people that are more aligned with Esau and, part of this Westphalian concept for Israel, they're gonna be pushing for international community power. But this is part of people were saying the Great Reset. This is the Great Reset. People were saying, oh, the Great Reset, was, during the crisis in 2020 and all this. It didn't happen. The Great Reset didn't happen. If anything, the Bio-Patriot Act happened. What is the Great Reset? The Great Jubilee, right, is the resetting of what's going on the Temple Mount. That's the Great Reset. the international community is fracturing. It has cracks because it's aligned with itself with Esau. Now, again, the United States will be blessed and cursed, just like Israel is blessed and cursed. But if the United States makes sure that it aligns itself with Jacob in the aggregate, in its totality, there will be more blessing than curse.
People who are violating international law are justifying their violations. And that means they are pretending that international law either has no meaning or does not apply to them. But whatever intention they have, the outcome is the emptying out of international law, the emptying out of the Geneva Convention that were supposed to regulate war, the emptying out of the Genocide Convention, the emptying out of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and the completely uselessness of the Security Council. We have an International Court of Justice that could play a role, and yet its rulings are being ignored. So all in all, coming on the heels of Russia's aggression of Ukraine, the only conclusion that we can reach is that the international system is collapsing and that the world is being plunged back to where we were promised.
Let the international community plunge, because I think the UN is absolutely causing more harm than good. Please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and make sure that you get the structural nano silver toothpaste. Why? Because it's the best toothpaste that you can buy. It has no fluoride in it. It has structural nano silver. It will neutralize pathogens. It will whiten your teeth, freshen your breath, and also help improve your cardiovascular health, because poor oral hygiene can lead to cardiovascular issues and valvular issues. So please go to my store and get the structural nano silver toothpaste. It's the best toothpaste that you can buy. It's way better than anything Alex Jones sells. Get several tubes of this for your household and help support my work. It's the-studio-reykjavik.com. Link is in the description. As the world goes to hell because the international community is failing, please go to my store and get the structural nano silver soaps. I have it in different varieties. This one's in charcoal tea tree, peppermint, lavender, and oatmeal. Get a few bars of this for your household. It's made from the structural nano silver. It helps to neutralize pathogens. It's a high quality soap, and it helps support my work. You can get it by clicking the link in the description of this video, the-studio-reykjavik.com.
Will happen never again.
Dr. Angus Calamar, we want to go to U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, who on Wednesday called for an investigation into the mass graves at Nasser Hospital.
We have been in touch at multiple levels with the Israeli government. We want answers. We want to understand exactly what happened. You've seen some public commentary from the IDF on that, but we want to know the specifics of what the circumstances of this were, and we want to see this thoroughly and transparently investigated so that the whole world can have a comprehensive answer, and we, the United States, can as well.
So that's Jake Sullivan speaking Wednesday. If you could respond to that, and what kind of investigation you believe needs to happen, and who should conduct this investigation?
Well, first and foremost, Amnesty International and others have been calling for those investigations.
Amnesty International is in bed with Hamas. So you think that there are a legitimate, honest broker in this whole thing? Of course not.
very long time. The journalist that was speaking before me pointed out that those investigations have been called on since 2014 and nothing has ever happened. You cannot rely on the Israeli authorities to deliver any kind of meaningful investigation. Right now, no one can enter Gaza. No one can provide the expertise required for this investigation. We have mass graves. People are looking, and that's absolutely humane, are looking for their loved one, which means that the crime scene itself is going to be meaningless within a few hours or a few days.
I don't know this woman at all, but how many times has she mentioned the war crimes that Hamas committed on October 7th? How many times has she discussed the embedding of Hamas within the population, which is a war crime? I'm willing to bet maybe once since October 7th. Probably not more than twice. But how many times has she demonized Israel? Just in this episode.
Certainly nobody there who can protect the crime scene, who can provide the necessary expertise so that at least we have a sense of how people died, when did they die, and the kind of violation that have been perpetrated against them. So yes, we want an investigation, but I don't think this is a genuine demand for an investigation. People know that mass graves are extremely fragile, and right now there are probably no crime scene left to be investigated effectively. But we don't need that investigation to conclude that Israel has been committing war crimes after war crimes after war crimes. We have plenty of evidence since October 7 of many of those violations. We at Amnesty International have documented with good evidence indiscriminate shelling of civilians.
What about building a hospital on a tunnel system for Hamas? Amnesty International.
We know from people on the ground that almost all civilians' infrastructures have been destroyed. And this cannot be justified just by the notion of military objective or military necessity. We have the evidence required to conclude that Israel has, repeatedly, to an extent unprecedented extent, violated international law. It is now time for the United States, more than time, it's too late, in fact, for the United States to take a stand, to denounce Israel's violations, to stop arming Israel, because that's what they are still doing, and to do everything in their power to put an end to this bloodshed, to the killings of the Palestinians that we are all witnessing, that we are all made to witness.
Can you talk, Dr. Kalamar, about the U.S. disconnect of the Biden administration? On the one hand, calling vaguely for a ceasefire and saying from Blinken to President Biden, their hearts are broken when it comes to Palestinian casualties. But on the other hand, continuing to supply the weapons.
It's not a disconnect. I think it's very well organized and very well scripted. They are making some sounds that they feel they have to make, but
the elephant in the room is that this is going to a larger war. And Esau is going to lose.
There's absolutely no impact on their actions. We are now middle of April. A month ago, finally, the United States agreed to a ceasefire, adding, though, that it was non-binding. So, that also shows that their heart was not really into the ceasefire.
The U.S. abstained.
Yes. Insisting that the ceasefire was actually not that the resolution was non-binding. They have had plenty of opportunities since October 7 to demand a ceasefire, but they use their right of veto to stop it. And let me add, and as well as the release of all the hostages. So it's not a disconnect. I think it's a very well planned, very well scripted commitment to support Israel all the way, including to a possible genocide. Because let's recall that the International Court of Justice has concluded that the risk of genocide were extremely high. And we have every evidence in front of us of those risks. Indeed, some eminent legal scholars have concluded that genocide was already occurring. So the United States is providing support.
There's also legal scholars that are saying the opposite, that genocide is not happening. So it's not, it's not so clear cut on what's going on. Now, my take on this is that Israel needs to kick the shit out of Hamas, Hezbollah, and the military apparatus in Iran. Or we're going to have a lot worse of a situation down the road where more people will be killed, it'll cost more, and it most likely will go unconventional. See, people don't realize that this has been happening since 2006, since 2008, since 2009, 2014, 2016. And each time, more people on both sides die. And each time, it costs more. And each time, Iran gets closer to a nuclear weapon. Get the fucking job done, and we will have peace in this world. But when the international community tries to demonize Israel as escape velocity is about to be had with nuclear weapons in Iran, the whole world is going to be in trouble. Because Iran is a theocracy. And this whole Shia and Sunni issue and the infighting within the Muslim community, on top of right now Shia attacking Israel, the international community better get on the side of Jacob, because being on the side of Esau is going to lead to a mushroom cloud.
Country that is violating international law repeatedly, that is justifying those violations in the name of going after Hamas without due respect for the proportionality and the discrimination that should accompany.
Just imagine, you have a tumor, all right? And they do a biopsy on the tumor and they find out that it went metastasized. All right, you have metastasized cancer. But they think, the surgeons think, the oncologists think that they have isolated where the metastasis has happened, and they have to go in and take out a lot of these tumors. Let's say you had colon cancer that ended up getting into your liver, all right? And they want to take out the colon cancer, parts of your colon, and parts of your liver. But they have a high probability of success for you, all right? Hamas, in this case, is the fucking tumor, is the cancer that has metastasized to Hamas, to Hezbollah, to the military apparatus in Iran. And if the surgical techniques, AKA warfare, by the Israelis are needed to get the fucking cancer out, then that's what's needed. Instead of you have a bunch of non-doctors, non-surgeons, non-oncologists telling you and how to conduct the operation. That's what's happening here.
Their actions. By so doing, the United States is making itself complicit to some of the worst possible crimes being committed right now.
Yeah. So just let's demonize Israel. Let's keep Hamas. Let's keep Hamas in their little sandbox in Gaza, and not go after Hezbollah, and let Iran go nuclear. And oh, by the way, the Iranians are pretty smart. They're actually smarter than the Americans. And you know what? They could make biologics too. Now, do you understand why it's so important to take this thing out before they have the breakout?
You could put this in the wider context of what your report finds. You've said that the world is facing the demise of the 1948 international order created after the Second World War, amid both the conflict in Gaza and in Ukraine. If you could elaborate on your conclusion.
Sure.
Yeah, my conclusion is the international community is failing since World War II because we're aligned with Esau and not aligned with Jacob, and we want the New World Order. If you want freedom, get on the side of Jacob. If you want tyranny, you're going to be with Esau. Oh, Dr. Paul Cottrell, how could you say that? What about the plans of a caliphate? Don't you think a caliphate is something that would be antithetical to Western values?
So I've already highlighted what's happening in Gaza and how Israel is violating international law and is justifying those violations. This is coming hot on the heels of Russia's aggression in Ukraine itself, a violation of the UN Charter. Russia, too, is justifying its violation of international law. It's justifying its violation of the UN Charter in the name of some kind of vision of its own security. Russia, too, has been justifying its repeated violations of international Geneva Convention through its bombardment of Ukrainian through the forced transfer of populations. So over the last 24 months, we have seen some of the main superpowers in this world claiming that the international legal system that was established after World War II does not apply to them. We have seen Russia doing that, we have seen Israel doing that, and we have seen the United States doing that by proxy through its support to Israel. Those institutions that were established after World War II, including the Security Council, and later on, the International Criminal Court, the International Court of Justice, these are the backbone of preventing the very worst happening to the world. And those institutions have been rendered, useless, really. The Security Council cannot do anything.
That's a good thing to prevent a new world order.
For peace and security because of the abuse of the veto power. The International Court of Justice is delivering very strong rulings that everyone is ignoring. The International Criminal Court is delivering warrants, including against President Putin, that most people are ignoring. So those institutions that are supposed to protect us all are not protecting us anymore. And the international legal framework, the international normative framework is...
The international community has failed. You have nuclear proliferation, you have terrorism, and you have these other unconventional means of warfare now with biologics. Get rid of the international community. I mean, if I was president of the United States, then maybe that would be a good thing. I would take every single brick of the UN, put it on a barge, and dump it into the Atlantic Ocean. Because there is nothing good that comes out of the UN.
Progressively emptied out through those actions and through the justification of those violations. When Israel is saying international law does not apply to us because we have a well-founded military objective and military necessity, they are pretending that this military necessity takes precedence over everything. That is not the case. That is not the case. When Russia is
so the international community is going to tell you on how to protect your country. The international community is going to tell you on what businesses you can have. The international community is going to tell you through carbon tax how much energy you can consume.
and what types of energy you use. The international community is going to tell you that we need to block out the sun to cool the earth. The international community is going to tell you how to live your life. See the problem? It's taxation without representation. It is a rule of from an uber government nullifying the sovereignty of individual nations. The international community, the international apparatus needs to be destroyed. They're just as bad as the national security state.
So the UN Charter does not apply to us because of whatever NATO may be doing. They are also emptying out the UN Charter. That is not the purpose of the UN Charter. That is not there to be violated by Russia in that way. So the entire legal normative framework right now is at risk of completely collapsing. And what do we have instead? Nothing. We have the power of the arms, the weapons, and we are basically going back to our pre-1940 situation. We are back to where we were supposed not to ever again go back to.
And if you could also talk about, a number of places that the report.
The international community was on board expanding NATO and poking the bear that caused the problems that we have with Putin now. Instead of embracing Russia after the fall of the Berlin Wall and bringing them into the economic international community, let the international community just implode. Let the United Nations implode. It's a waste of money. It's a waste of time. Not only that, it causes a lot of traffic disruption in New York. And oh, by the way, all these ambassadors to the UN, not all, but most, when they come into town, into New York, they're calling the escort services. So you really think not only are they getting kickbacks from corporations and fleecing their constituents, but they're also using whorehouses in New York. So the international community is all lily white. The UN is all lily white. No, it is a bed of corruption.
Highlights that receive very little media attention, Myanmar and Sudan. If you could talk about the massive rights violations going on there.
Yes, absolutely. And that too, I should have mentioned, these are the so-called forgotten crises. They are characterized by massive violations by parties to that conflict. Sudan in particular, I've seen thousands of people dead over the last 12 months, the largest number of people, refugees abroad in a very short period of time. The massive use of sexual violence, ethnic violence, and finally, when the Security Council took action, it took them almost a year, their resolution has been completely ignored. So the suffering in Sudan is falling off the international agenda, and yet it is extremely heartbreaking. In Myanmar, there the military government has been protected by China. We finally saw the Security Council a year and a half ago taking a resolution that was quite timid, but the first step. But meanwhile, the militaries have been armed by China. They have continued their indiscriminate or even targeted attacks on civilians throughout the territory. Hundreds of people have been arrested, tortured, even political prisoners have been condemned to death, sentenced to death, and killed. That's the situation in Myanmar. I'm not mentioning the Democratic Republic of Congo that has completely fallen the agenda for the last 20, 30 years, and yet it is probably the longest ever crisis again where no one is taking action or the kind of action that is being required. So the forgotten crises around the world are multiplying. They are increasing. In fact, according to the expert, we are witnessing an increase in the number of armed conflicts around the world, a reflection of a very unstable international system, a reflection of the conflict between the three superpowers vying for hegemony, the United States, Russia, and China, and the multiplication of those conflicts by proxy, I will say, between them is costed in human lives, in hundreds and thousands, millions of human lives around the world.
Finally, Agnes Calamard, if you can talk about the alarm that you're sounding in this report on artificial intelligence and its role in furthering racism, discrimination, division during public elections. You note the dominance of big tech risks a supercharging of human rights violations. Talk about what you see as the dangers.
Absolutely. So we know that over the last 12 months, we have seen generative artificial intelligence coming into our almost daily reality. It is a technology that no one really fully understands, certainly not politicians and policymakers. It is one that is completely unregulated as of now. And if what has happened with artificial intelligence, non-generative one, is to be the benchmark by which to assess what is going to happen in the future, then we need to be very worried. Over the last few years, Amnesty International has been monitoring how artificial intelligence, for instance, platform, social media platform, in facial recognition, through the spywares, all of those technologies have had a disastrous impact on human rights. Over the last 12 months, in Facebook, for instance, platforms have been used to launch and to spread ethnic violence in Ethiopia. In Serbia, we have documented that semi-automated algorithms have been used, particularly in the context of the provision of public social assistance, in ways that has discriminated against Roma people and people with disability. Spywares that were denounced, that have been denounced since 2020, 2021 with the Pegasus project. Well, guess what? In 2023, we found more evidence of Pegasus being used in many countries around the world, including India, where we're going to have elections coming up. So the control of the spyware is not happening. In addition to Pegasus that continue to be used around the world, we have.
And then when you couple that with blockchain and meta tagging of your movements with your phone or with what you purchase, and you have these algorithms, and you got this surveillance state that Snowden was warning everybody about, and you got the crazy things that are going on with the national security state that WikiLeaks was warning about, and Julian Assange was warning about. This is part of the reason why the national security state and the international order needs to be destroyed. And while we're destroying that apparatus, please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get the peppermint deodorant. This is peppermint, lavender, and tea tree. It's made from all essential oils from the Himalayas, and it's dual purpose. Not only is it used as a deodorant for males and females, but it'll help to slowly detoxify your body. So use this. It has no aluminum and no baking soda in it. So please go to my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and get the deodorant. I also have it in citrus, all essential oils from the Himalayas. So please go to the store, get either the citrus or the peppermint, lavender, tea tree deodorant. I prefer the citrus, but that's just me. Most people actually buy the peppermint. In addition, I have a very strong antioxidant that's part of boosting up your immune system and slowing down the aging process. Why is it important? It's important because we build up free radicals in our cells, all right? And we build up more free radicals as we get older. So it's important to neutralize those to prevent cellular damage and tissue damage. Because if you get too many free radicals, you'll get irreversible necrosis, and your mitochondria's health will go down. So I have C60 in avocado, coconut, MCT coconut, and also extra virgin olive oil in a 2 ounce, a 4 ounce, and an 8 ounce configuration. So go to the store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, and purchase either your 2 ounce, your 4 ounce, or 8 ounce in avocado, coconut oil, or olive oil. If you get the 2 ounce, take a dropper of it a day. If you get the 4 ounce or 8 ounce, take a teaspoon of it a day. I take a teaspoon of it a day. If I'm not feeling well, I take a tablespoon of it a day. All right. It's important because when you're sick, you're going to start to increase the number of free radicals. All right. So you want to kind of mitigate that. If you do this every day, you're going to start to notice that you're going to have more energy because your mitochondria is healthier, and that's where your ATP is created. Most of your ATP is created in your mitochondria. So by doing that, you're going to have more energy. And not only that, the free radicals that are doing damage to the cell are going to be neutralized. So the cell will be performing better. In addition, it helps with memory. Why? Because your neurons need a lot of ATP to be able to shoot those neurotransmitters and to help to build the neurotransmitters to produce the neurotransmitters. So you need a lot of ATP for your neurons. So you need healthy mitochondria. So this will improve your mitochondrial health. Increase that ATP so those neurons will be firing. It's synergistic with the clarity factor, because the clarity factor on my store will reduce that brain fog and allow you to focus and get those dendritic connections firing more often. All right. This is going to keep the cell healthy, the neuron healthy, and bring down those free radicals. And as we age, we build up free radicals. We produce more free radicals. So you want to soak them up. So take a teaspoon a day, or if you get the 2 ounce, because of cost, it's important to take it every day. So, because of cost, some people can't afford a teaspoon of it a day. So just take a full dropper, but you want to take it every day. That's the key. You want to take it on an empty stomach. You want to take it every day so there's compound effect. And you're going to start seeing that your body is healing and you're slowing down the aging process. If you're sick, take double dose. All right. Because when you're sick, you're going to produce more free radicals. If you're going to work out, take it before your workout and you'll recover quicker. Why? Because when you work out, you create free radicals, and you want this in your system before your workout to be able to neutralize those free radicals. If you follow what I've been saying about the products that I offer on my store, the-studio-reykjavik.com, it will improve your health, boost your immune system, produce more energy, you'll have more vitality, and you'll slow the aging process.
Monitor this year the use of the Predator file, which is EU, European based, and that too has been used and sold around the world, including against journalists, activists, human rights defenders. So abusive facial recognition, abusive mass surveillance, abusive use of spyware, all of those things are extremely dangerous for human rights, including in a context where there is
this part I agree with. And I've been saying a long time. Artificial intelligence and blockchain and cryptocurrency, all this stuff, they go hand in hand. It's part of the surveillance technology.
Around conflict, and they should be the object of moratorium. We are calling as well on those big tech companies whose business model is feeding the multiplication of data, of certain kind of data. We are calling on them as well to be much better regulated than they are now, but also to take action to regulate their own content. But it's the Wild West. It's the Wild West in a context of the collapse of the international system. This is why we are sounding the alarm. I mean, you know, as of today, we have the international system on the brink of collapse. We have an industrial revolution, a revolution of information technology that no one is regulating effectively, and that has the potential to run a major disaster for societies. It is more than time to wake up to the reality that we are confronting if we want to deliver to our children and grandchildren a safer planet. I haven't even mentioned the climate crisis in the midst of it all. So I'm sorry if I'm being very apocalyptic here, but I think people need to wake up to the reality that we are really, really facing an incredibly serious, dangerous situation for all of us.
Agnes Calamard, we want to thank you so much for being with us. Amnesty.
So that's my broadcast for today. Thank you for, especially if you've gone this far, thank you for watching. Please subscribe to all my channels. I have 3 channels on YouTube. I have Brighteon, Bitchute, and Rumble. I also have a new channel on YouTube called The Studio-Reykjavik. So please subscribe to that. All the links are in the description of this video. Please follow me on X. Please follow me on Facebook and GETTR so you can get notifications. I am censored on YouTube. I don't have the reach that I used to have because of the algorithm, unfortunately. So please follow me on all the channels. Please share the links to my videos, especially from Rumble, Bitchute, Brighteon, and also the YouTube ones. And please help support my work by purchasing the products that I offer on my store. In addition, you can donate on my website through Stripe, PayPal, or Buy Me a Coffee, or be a paid member to help support my news coverage with Patreon. I have different tiers for Patreon to give you different access to my content. So please help support my work. Better yet, also purchase the products to help to boost up your immune system and to improve your health. Thank you for listening and have a nice day.